Hello, everyone. It's episode 240 of the Lookout Sir podcast, the greatest and best podcast you've probably ever heard of or seen. My name's Philip. I am doing a solo episode today, and it's also a deep dive into the Warhammer 40k Core Rules 11th edition. Yay! So that's come out recently. It's basically a first look, read through, going through it in quite crunchy detail. So if you want a quick 30-minute overview, go check out someone like Tabletop Tactics. They've probably done a much better job. But if you want someone's first impression of going through all the rules, criticizing them within an inch of their life, then you have come to the right place. Overall, it's very good. There are some things I wouldn't have done or wouldn't have changed, and you can follow along with me as we discover them. It's going to be a very long episode, so there's going to be no outro, and hopefully we'll get back to our usual format next episode, and maybe Tim or Richie will find some free time to come and join me and hang out with me, so I'm not a big old loner on my own in my shed. So with that all said and done, thank you for sticking around. Please do watch the entire episode. That will be greatly appreciated. You can also, like and subscribe, engage with me in the comments, especially where I invariably get things wrong talking about rules. Please do that. Also, you can support on Patreon as usual. That is greatly appreciated. And if you are listening along, you can watch along over on YouTube, where I'll have the PDF up for us to go through and look at. So you can join me there. And if you don't like joining me there, you can listen along on Audible, Spotify, iTunes, the usual. I'm available in many places. And with that all rambled through as quickly as possible, because I don't want to bang on about those things, let's get on with the show and check out these 11th edition 40k rules. Going through the core rules, the new 11th edition Warhammer rules. Similar to previous editions, Games Workshop have put out the core rules for free. This time I feel like it's a little bit earlier than it was previously. I think before they tended to release them around the time that the actual launch box came out. I believe there was a leak in French that was being translated, so I feel like maybe they pushed through previewing or giving away the rules for free a little bit earlier. So we're going to have a talk through them. We're going to go through them potentially quite in depth. I'll see how I get on. This will be like my first reaction to the rules in any kind of real detail. So it'd be interesting to see, my take to it. If I get anything wrong, obviously, if I do, please let me know down in the comments if you're watching along on YouTube. And if you're listening on Audible or your usual podcast stuff, head over to YouTube and roast me in the comments if I get anything wrong. Likewise, please leave your reactions of what you think about these rules, whether it's good or positive. I'd love to hear it all. The core rules, let's start off. Obviously, you've got some flavor text. We're going to find the juicy stuff. So obviously, we've got a contents page. There are 89 pages in total by the looks of it, or at least up to 89, maybe a little extra in terms of that index. So what have we got? Introduction, cool. Basic rules, the battle round, the battlefield and tactics, which includes things like terrain and objectives, stratagems, actions has been added back in. Then we've got advanced rules covering things like vehicles, transports, attached units, aircraft, which feels like something they're always trying to get rid of. So it'd be interesting to see what they do there. And then lastly, we've got some references and those core rules index. So interesting to see what those will be as well. So obviously we've got an introduction to lovely people playing a game of Warhammer. Then we've got some details about, mustering an army, creating a battlefield. I don't think there's anything in here to do with how you actually build your army itself. So things like, building your detachments and things like that. It specifically says missions will instruct players to muster an army. So I guess all of the rules for that are over in the mission. So there are some elements that, you would normally see in the 40k core rules that maybe aren't here. And it's also worth noting that they tag the Warhammer 40,000 app. Specifically, they talk about, on the following pages, references to additional app content are highlighted in green as shown below. So example app reference. And this is one thing I'm aware of already because I've had a few discussions with some friends. And I'll talk about that when we get to it, because it probably won't be too long before we start seeing these references dotted around. Okay, so let's begin with the basic rules. So basically understanding core concepts, things like armies, units and models, active player and opposing player. Now, I think this is all relatively straightforward. So I'm going to skip through things that feel obvious, and I want to really focus in on things that feel like they've most likely changed. And in doing so, I might miss over some things. It's worth noting, the layout so far seems pretty good. They've got this numbering system, which they did in previous editions, and I know AOS does it as well. So 01.01, so the very first reference. So I guess the idea is if they need to call back to certain rules, they can denote the number, which isn't necessarily a page number. It's just going to be the element on a page. Although interestingly, we are on page 1 according to this. So maybe 01 is the page number, and then this is the first reference. This is obviously the second, and that's the third. So we'll see how that goes by going to the second page. This is now page 2, but also page 9 in the PDF. And you'll see it still says 01. So it's obviously sections rather than page numbers. Wouldn't that be nice if it was also a page number reference as well? But that is sort of meaningless to an extent when you're using something like an app. So looking at this is actually page 8, but this is section 1. I think previously the core rules had their own individual page numbers because the idea was this could be a PDF and you were starting from 1. So halfway through the core rules, it had its own page numbering system. So this is obviously sections, not page numbers. So measuring distances, that's going to be the same. Using things like dice, they're talking about what is a 2+, what is a 1 to 3, what is a D3, things like that. All quite straightforward. How you do leadership roles, how you do battle shock tests. Let's have a quick read of battle shock tests because that has changed, but I assume the roles are going to be the same. So to make a battle shock roll, a controlling player makes a leadership roll, see above. If that roll fails, that unit and each model in it is battle shocked. And obviously if it's successful, the unit does not become battle shocked. While a unit is battle shocked, the objective control characteristic of that model is dash. And the controlling player cannot target that unit with stratagems. It is not eligible to start an action, and any action it has started cannot be completed. Okay, all quite straightforward. It doesn't say anything about still being battle shocked. I assume maybe that will be in the phase order. But here we see these things highlighted in green. So see also active player and opposing player, which they do talk about above, but players' rules, rule sequencing, closest model and unit, table quarter, what is wholly within, and just within. So these are quite niche terms, and I assume these aren't in here. They are taking you off to the app to read these additional rules. And they're definitely not in the book because Ash from Guerrilla Miniature Games, he's got the actual book and has done a preview of it, and these bright green sections still exist there. So even in the physical core rules, it's still sending you off to the app, which personally I don't like because I would rather the core rules be complete and have everything in them. But I do understand it because some of these are very niche terms that most people will already understand. If you're a gamer, you probably know what a table quarter is. I remember, I think it was maybe 9th edition where a table quarter had to actually be specified in an errata, because rather than it being the 4 squares of the table quarters, some people were saying, well, a table quarter could be measured diagonal like this, and these segments could be table quarters instead. So because of tournament players sadly ruining things for everyone else, things like table quarters now need to be completely laid out and spelt out for everyone. I can sort of understand that, maybe someone would interpret it differently. Maybe different cultures measure quarters in different ways. but it feels like it's a sort of standard thing. So yeah, saving space, saving pages in your books. But personally, I like a book, especially a physical book, to be the complete edition of a game and have every single rule in there. And I get it with things like FAQs. I don't want to bloat books out, but some of these things, what is a roll off? If you've never played a game before and you're trying to appeal to a beginner player, you won't know what a reroll is. You won't know what a roll off is. Those things are quite fundamental to playing the game. You can't physically play this game without knowing how to re-roll a dice or to do a roll off with someone. And then there's other things. So, battle shock rolls. So it talks about the command phase, but then it says multiple battle shock rolls. So yeah, what does happen when you have multiple battle shock rolls? That feels like quite a fundamental thing that even as an experienced gamer, I would want to know the answer to. And having it in the book would be so much more straightforward. That feels a bit more fundamental and less of an edge case, because that is probably something that will come up quite often in the game. So yeah, it's an interesting decision that they've made. I'm not necessarily sure I agree with it, but I can understand why they've done it. Okay, so then they're going on to talk about what a data sheet is. So see also, what do we have? Characteristic modifiers, destroyed. So I guess what is a destroyed unit or model? Random characteristics, which is quite interesting. And then mixed keywords in units. So all quite useful things to actually want to know. And I guess some of these things I've always found when you're trying to look up niche rules on the app, it's always been quite terrible, because you type in a rule and quite often it sends you to the FAQ or the errata, or maybe it sends you to a data sheet that has those things on and not the actual main rule. So if the app gets updated with these things and they're easier to look up, that will make sense. Having these things in a digital version, so if I could click on this and it would take me to that rules reference, that would make much more perfect sense. But this is either going to be a physical thing or it's a PDF, so I can't do those things. So the linking system feels like it should be better than it actually ends up being. Okay, so now we get into some of the main rules. So how do you go about moving units? One of the key things that they've changed here is, so each time you move a model, unless otherwise stated, it can move through friendly models. So that's one of the newest changes that they've done. Obviously, you can move through any space its base can fit through. That seems sensible, and I don't know if that's something they've ever clarified in previous editions. Base cannot move through enemy models. That's same as before, and a base cannot cross the edge of the battlefield, which was always a niche case that they needed to specify. And all stated while moving conditions must be met, and that's interesting. So models move in a straight line. Models can rotate. So each time you rotate a model, it can turn in any amount around the center of its space while keeping it upright. Note that rotating a model does not count towards the distance it has moved. So this is something they've also changed. So in the last edition, slightly larger models on oval bases that weren't circular, all vehicles predominantly, things like knights, when they rotated, they were doing a pivot move, which cost them on average 2 inches of their movement. That's now gone. So now everything can rotate around freely. So yes, technically we can go back to the slightly gamey metric of having your models lined up on your deployment zone, long edge if you're an oval, facing, so you're side on, basically. At the start of your turn, you can rotate your model around and potentially gain a couple of inches, depending on the size of your model. But the thing is, yes, you can do that. I don't really think it's a huge problem. And it's just a sort of tactic to be aware of, I guess, especially in terms of distances for things like that. So ultimately, the pivoting rule, it was a bit fiddly. I think this might just clean things up, but then it'll be interesting to see how the tournament scene takes us on board and maybe ruins it for everyone. And we got to go back to the pivoting coming back in. So then it says, ending a move. After you finish setting up all models in a unit and or moving all of those models in a unit that you want to move, check that all the following apply. So a unit is on the battlefield, it is in coherency. No models in that unit are on another model or partway through a surface of a terrain feature, wall or ceiling, and all stated after moving conditions are met. If one or more of the above conditions are not met, that unit cannot make the move and its models are returned to their positions at the start of the move. Otherwise, after resolving any additional rule stated in the after moving section of the move type, that moves ends. Okay, so basically, if you can't make a valid move, you don't make that move whatsoever. So that sort of makes sense. Right, so we get some examples of how you go about moving in a straight line. Interestingly, he talks about your, other rules that this might reference. So train, transports, your random movement, and then different types of moves that you can do. So ingress move, normal move, pile in. And then we've got the issue with rotating. So we get an example of that. And then in a vehicle that's got a hole, how we go about pivoting, obviously, from the center. So good that they've given us examples of those things. So then we get more in terms of moving. So we get things like what is setting up. These are the conditions that I think that you need to make. So when you're setting up a unit, it's got to be in coherency. The unit is unengaged and all our requirements and restrictions. So then we've got coherency, 2 inches horizontal, 5 inches vertical with at least one other model in that unit, and within 9 inches horizontally and 5 inches vertically of every other model in that unit. So obviously that's another new thing that people have been talking about lately. So the entire cluster of your entire unit has to be within 9 inches horizontally. I think there is worth noting that it's not wholly within 9 inches, so you do get a bit of extra wiggle room that your bases could be towing into that 9 inches. That makes perfectly sense. I think one thing that has changed actually is that you have to basically be within 5 inches vertically of all other models, so you can't necessarily be spread out across several floors like you might have been able to in a previous edition, because vertical coherency was 5 inches, but not many people were using a lot of verticality in previous editions. So maybe that wasn't really a real issue. But now you have to basically be on the same floor or one floor up for the entire unit, I believe. Yeah, I think I'm reading that right. So regaining coherency. So in the end of the turn step of each player's turn, if one or more units on the battlefield are not in coherency, those units controlling players must remove models from them one at a time until they are in coherency again. Models removed in that way are destroyed. So that's pretty much how it was always done. But it's interesting that this is done at the end of the turn step in each player's turn. But in theory, there should be no way to move out of coherency. So you can't charge out of coherency and then be like, oh, but by the end I've piled in and stuff, I'll be back in coherency, which is something people could do shenanigans wise in previous editions. Then they talk about engagement. So engagement range is now no longer 1 inch, is now 2 inches, but it's still 5 inches vertically. My one point I was going to make about the coherency in the 9 inch horizontal, like max, personally, I would just actually change it. So coherency isn't 2 inches, it's like 1 inch or half an inch, because I prefer units looking clustered together, and they've sort of forced it with this sort of maximum distance, which does also work, but because I guess even if you were to have a half-inch coherency like you get in AOS, you probably still get a bunch of units still being able to daisy chain around. But yeah, personally, 2-inch coherency I think is madness, except for maybe like sort of more elite units. But for most standard units, it's far too much. You can just take up far too much space on the board. So the 9-inch horizontally does sort of fix it in a way. Right. So then we got the example of that coherency. With your 9 inches, and you'll notice that they are slightly over 9 inches because you don't have to be wholly within, you just need to be within, and then they're showing you an example of your 2-inch engagement range, basically, for combat. So when we make an attack, let's have a quick read through this in case it's different whatsoever. So you got to select weapons, select targets, and then resolve attacks. And you're doing this while shooting and also while fighting. So when shooting, you can select one or more ranged weapons that model has, and while fighting, you must select one melee weapon that model has. Interestingly, it doesn't seem to be any distinction, because normally infantry could only fight with one weapon and one pistol, I believe, and it was only things like monsters and vehicles that could fire with all of them. But maybe that will appear further down the line in a different rule somewhere. But maybe all units can just shoot with all weapons now, which is very rare. And I imagine pistols have just a specific rule that if they're fired, other weapons can't be fired. Because it's quite rare that a unit or a character or even just like a squad will be armed with multiple weapons. That just doesn't really happen. But there might be some odd edge cases, so you never know. So while shooting, for each weapon, while shooting, select one enemy unit to be the target. Unless otherwise stated, each target must be visible to the model that has the weapon and within range of that weapon, and you must also be unengaged. Obviously, pistols will be different for that. And then while fighting, each target must be engaged with the model that has that weapon, and you cannot select more targets than weapons attacks characteristics. Okay. Interesting. So in theory, if you've got 5 attacks, you could split that across multiple targets. And it says enemy units to be the target, so not models. Pretty much the same as always. Okay, now we get to resolve attacks. So you select an enemy unit, one or more weapons. You gather your attack dice. This is where we're going to get into some fast rolling, so it's probably worth talking about. You select one weapon targeting that unit. Also, have you noticed there's not bullet points anymore? There used to be in the last edition like the detailed rules, and then at the bottom like a quick bullet pointed summary for you to quickly read. That seems to have completely gone. And maybe it's because people just relied on that and could misinterpret the rules from those bullet points. Plus, it also took up a lot more space. So yeah, you select your enemy unit, you gather your attack dice, select one weapon targeting that unit that has not yet used to make the attack against it, and gather a number of d6 equal to the weapon's attack characteristic. These are the attack dice. Each one represents one attack being made by an attacking model with that weapon. If one or more of those weapons targeting that unit make identical attacks to the selected weapon, see below, and those weapons have not yet been used to make attacks against the target, they do so now, and you gather those weapons' attack dice as well. So it says, e.g., for 3 weapons making identical attacks, each with an attack characteristic of 2, gather a total of 6d6. So step 3, you resolve the attack dice for the number of attacks you've just gathered, and then 4 other attacks. So follow the first of the instructions below that applies. So if there are any weapons targeting the same unit that have not yet used the attacks, gather the attack dice. Otherwise, if there are weapons with unresolved attacks targeting a different unit, return to the select enemy step. Otherwise, if all weapons have been used to make all of those attacks, the sequence ends and the attacking unit attacks have been resolved. So I think this is basically just fast dice. You select your, all of your bolters, all of your chainswords in that unit, and you just roll them all together. So identical attacks are those with the same ballistic skill, weapon skill, strength, AP, and damage characteristic, because they're going to be the things that affect the roll, which are affected by the same applicable abilities and rules. So there might be, even if you had the same stats, but you had a different ability, let's say ignores cover, for example, then actually you would still do that one separately. Splitting melee attacks. So while selecting targets, if you select more than one unit, if the target of the melee weapon, you must split that weapon's attacks between those target units. To do so, declare how many weapons attacks will be made against each unit. You must declare at least one attack per unit targeted in the gather the attack dice step for each weapon that is splitting its attacks. Only gather a number of attack dice for the weapon equal to the number of attacks you declared. Okay, so this is all same as before. So you can split your attacks across multiple targets. So see also close quarters, extra attacks, multiple weapon profiles, selecting targets, frame, shooting at engaged models and vehicles, random characteristics, and targets no longer eligible. Okay, so then we get the attack sequence. So this is all quite similar. So a hit roll of 1 is always a fail. Unmodified hit roll of a 6 is always a critical hit. And then if you get greater to or equal to your ballistic skill, weapon skill characteristic, it's a hit. And on any other result, it's also a fail. So this is a nice kind of way of graphically laying out those things with also dice symbols as well. And then a similar thing with wound rolls. So you've got 1 is a fail, 6 is a critical wound. And then if you have greater or equal to the required result, you get a wound roll. And then they break this down by the usual table. So, if you're twice as strong, if you're greater, if you're equal to, or if you're less than the toughness, and if you're half or less than the toughness, what your dice rolls need to be a success, and then everything else is a fail. Then we got save rolls. So this is where I think the newest element of fast dice rolling comes into effect. So you create groups. So you divide all the models in the target unit into the following groups, as many as required. So you get one group for each character model in that unit, one group for all other models with the same wounds, save, and invulnerable save characteristics. Note toughness is not at all mentioned here because that's done in the wounding step. If we just go back to toughness, make one wound roll for each result. Okay, so when you select your targets, you talk about your weapons. So you select your targets. Okay, while fighting. Doesn't say. Okay, so your wound rolls. So it says make one wound roll for each hit by rolling 1d6. For each result, check if it fails or wounds by matching the first condition below that applies. So it just says it's toughness. It doesn't specify if there are units with mixed toughness, what you do. Oh, I guess no select weapons. Okay, it doesn't really talk about it even in the see also section. So that's interesting. It's just assuming that when you make a wound roll, everyone's got the same toughness, which might not always be the case. That's the first thing I'm immediately flagging as a bit of an issue, because we know that can happen quite often, and it just assumes that you're wounding against a specific target. Because obviously things like save rolls, saving stats are different. So yeah, you're creating your groups, one for each character, one for each model with the same wound, a save, and invulnerable characteristic, and then the allocation order. So declare the order in which those groups will have attacks allocated to them, applying all of the following. So if a non-character group contains a model that has lost one or more wounds, that group must be the first in the allocation order, is often the bodyguard, right? No character group can be earlier in the allocation order than non-character groups. So if you've got multiple characters or characters and non-character groups, you've got to do all the non-character groups first. Character groups containing a model that has lost one or more wounds must be earlier in the allocation order than character groups that haven't. So, for example, if you use precision to target a specific character, let's say your captain, but in that unit is also a lieutenant, when the bodyguard unit is destroyed, captain is now the first one to be destroyed in combat. So this is actually assuming that, when you're fighting, everyone's still treated as one big unit. Potentially at the end of this attack sequence, and you just have two solo characters, or maybe these units split up into separate units. Maybe they stay. I don't know. We'll get to that. So, and then it says you make your save rolls. So the opposing player makes one save roll for each wound roll. So this is quite normal. You got your inflict damage step. So you select your models. You check your save roll. Again, you've got an unmodified roll of 1, inflict damage. If you've got an invulnerable save, the model basically needs to make that. And if it fails, if they pass it, you fail. Then you've got save and AP. So after modifying the result by the attacking AP characteristic, if it is equal to or greater than the save characteristic of the models of the current allocation, your attack fails. And then any other result, you inflict damage. Then you resolve damage. The selected model loses a number of wounds equal to the damage characteristic. So all quite straightforward. Give us a nice example of making multiple attacks. I assume you got bolters, bolt pistols, and a heavy bolter here, and then all the different attacks that you will make into a unit. You're resolving your attack dice, and then you're resolving other attacks. So interestingly, it looks like here you are shooting your bolt pistol and bolter at the same time because they've got the same attack profile. But then you do your heavy bolter separately, I'm assuming. Then the attack sequence examples, attacking attached units. So obviously you got Celestine here with a few different units. And what happens here. So I'm not going to go through this. I think this is all quite standard stuff. Then it talks about other concepts. So visibility, talking about line of sight. Line of sight is used to determine visibility between models. draw an imaginary 1 millimeter wide line from any part of that model to any other part being observed. This line is the line of sight. While doing so, other models in the observing models unit are ignored. Other models and units can be either visible or fully visible to the observing model as shown opposite. Note that terrain applies additional rules. Then we get things like mortal wounds, how that works. So I think this will be the same. So select one model in that unit by following the first instructions below that applies. So it's interesting that everything now has like a sequence of events that you start off and basically work your way down. Which is very, I think, like Magic the Gathering in terms of like sequencing and things like that. So if a non-character model in this unit has lost one or more wounds, you must select that model. Otherwise, if that unit contains one or more non-character models, you must select one of those models. Otherwise, if one or more character models in that unit have lost one or more wounds, you must select one. Otherwise, you must select another character. So same as before, following the same sequence. It is all a bit wordy and a bit... legalese, I guess. I've seen that term used a lot, and I think the last edition was worse for that. I don't think it's too bad, but everything is really spelt out, obviously. It's not just written in sort of more like conversational language like other games are. Mortal wounds are normal damage. When resolving attack dice, if those attacks inflict a mixture of both mortal wounds and normal damage, resolve all the normal damage first, then the mortal wound. So that is same as before. Hazard rolls. This has changed though. So to make a hazard roll, a unit rolls a d6 on a 1 or 2. The unit fails and suffers 1 mortal wound, or 3 mortal wounds instead for each model in that unit if it's a monster or vehicle. If 1 or more hazard rolls is required for a unit, make those hazard rolls all simultaneously. So it used to be on a roll of a 1, and can't remember if it was the current edition. So it used to be just 1 model died, but then characters took, I think it was 3. So that's changed now slightly. So infantry effectively will just take 1 mortal wound. So great for characters, great for space marines, things that have multiple wounds. You're not losing the whole unit. Monsters and vehicles taking 3 mortal wounds can be quite deadly, especially if you had something that would trigger it, or if you had multiple weapons that all need separate rolls. That would be quite dangerous. In theory, having a big plasma weapon, the max you're going to take is 3 mortal wounds. It's not like you're going, I'm rolling 6 attacks, and for each 1 I'm taking a mortal wound, which is what it used to be in even older editions. I think that was between 8th and 9th edition. So having it be separate is sort of safer. So yeah, then we've got some examples of how visible is your models. So you're visible but partially obscured in theory. You're fully visible if you're completely out in the open. And then similarly for a unit, if you can only see 1 model, then the unit is visible. But if you're completely out in the open, your unit is fully visible. I still wish back in the day that basically when it came to shooting, if you could only see that 1 model from an attacking unit into the defenders, you could only lose that 1 model. And I actually think that would really fix a lot of the sort of lethality issues that current 40k has, because currently I could shoot that 1 model and I could completely wipe out that entire unit. That feels really unfair, even though you will probably be taking the wounds on, I assume, these guys in cover first, maybe, or maybe it's just modifying your ballistic skill now, right? So it's going to affect your hit roll, but I would much rather it would just limit the actual number that you could kill. So it's like, cool, I can only see 1, so I can only kill 1, and therefore the lethality in the game is going to go right down. They've never done it, or it used to be like that. That's how older editions, like 7th edition prior, used to be. And it really changed in 8th edition. Oh, look at this. Look at this gem. That is a gorgeous bit of photography. So now we're getting into the battle round. So start of battle round. That's basically before either player's turns. Then you have a definition of what a player's turn is. And then you have a definition of what is the end of the battle round. So I would assume that is all quite straightforward. Battle round ends unless the battle ends, then the next battle round starts. The missions you're playing will tell you how many battle rounds there are. So they've in theory given you design space to have more than 5 battle rounds or less. That's never going to be the case. I very much doubt it. And then we've got it broken down. So you got start of turn step, little section prior to the command phase, which I guess did exist a little bit, but wasn't necessarily specified. Again, this was something Dan always requested, that everything is broken down into specific things. So the start of turn is a specific step, and then the end of turn is a step. And then in between that, we've got command phase, movement phase, shooting, charge, and fight phase. So those are all the same, but now start of turn and end of turn are defined steps in a graphic, which I sort of think they became a bit more coalesced in the last edition anyway, just because of the rules that were referring to them. So command phase, you get the start of the command phase where rules might be triggered. You gain your core 1 CP. So battle shock. Active players must now make 1 battle shock roll for each unit in the army that fulfills one or both of the following conditions. So the unit is currently battle shocked, and the unit is at below half strength. Now they haven't obviously defined this here, but below half strength is now half or less. It used to be below half strength. So sorry, that they say the unit is at or below half strength. It used to be specifically below half strength. So that's another core change. So units of, for example, 3 models would previously, that's a terrible example because it would actually be the same. Units of 4 models, if they lost 2, wouldn't be battle shocked and would only be battle shocked when they lost 3 models and would be down to 1. Whereas now when they've lost 2, and they've got 2 remaining, they would be potentially battle shocked. So they've got to make a battle shock test at that point. So that it makes battle shock much more deadly. And I have to say, give Games Workshop credit, love the fact that battle shock now sticks. Once you are battle shocked, you stay battle shocked. This was something I think we pointed out pretty much when we read the last edition's rules, right at the very beginning. It just seemed like such a no-brainer. Like, why wouldn't you still be battle shocked? It feels like that is how it should happen. It feels more realistic from that point of view. And the fact that Battle Shock felt like it was such a sort of edge case. I mean, I remember playing probably like my first 5 to 10 games and was constantly forgetting to even bother to do Battle Shock because it just didn't really seem to interact with anything. And you would occasionally make your rolls and that was it. But the more towards the end of the edition, it was like, oh, actually, yeah, Battle Shock can be really important at certain times, because I think as the codexes came out, more and more things kind of triggered it or gave you minuses to your leadership role and things like that. So Battle Shock will now be much more devastating, I think, and play a much bigger part of the game, which is good to see. So I'm glad that they've done that. So you get command abilities, rules that are triggered in the command phase. And then you've got the end of command phase, the rules that are triggered at the very end. First resolve rules triggered at this point other than mission rules, and then both players then consult the mission. If one or more players have achieved any aspects of their mission, they are triggered at this point, resolve them now. So that happens at the very end, which is important because it means you're doing all your battle shock stuff first. So if you're on a unit trying to claim it and you fail that battle shock test, you can't score. But I think that's pretty much similar to how it is in the current edition. So see also, we've got battle shock, modified characteristics, multiple battle shocks, which, still, who knows how that happens. I assume you just make 1 roll if there are multiple triggers for it. Because I guess now it's basically more chances to fail as opposed to pass. But it would be interesting that if you get, so if you got battle shocked during a turn and you're already battle shocked, I guess you should just auto fail, right? Because you are battle shocked for that turn. It shouldn't be a chance to become unbattle shocked. And that's, it'd be worth seeing just how they define that. So then they give us some battle shock examples, which are ignore. And then onto movement phase. So start of movement, how you move units. So you select a unit, select one friendly unit that has not been selected to move in this phase. You can select a unit on the battlefield in strategic reserve or embarked within a transport. And then you get different types of moves that you can make. So you can remain stationary, you can make a normal move, advanced move, fallback move, disembark move, and an ingress move. So ingress is the kind of key new one that we really want to look at. And then at the end of that, you've got your end of movement phase. So here they are. They've defined them in nice little graphics. So rather than it just being like make a move, it's remain stationary. Here is your maximum movement distance. It's nothing. You're eligible if, so it's to any unit, and then the effect is no models are moved. You have remained stationary. Do not trigger any rules that are triggered when this unit starts or ends a move. So yeah, really broken down, like in a sort of overly unneeded necessarily way, but I guess it probably makes life a lot easier for them. I can't say I'm a huge fan of the bolding and also the underlining. I think they tend to underline when it's the term not to reference, just in case someone's reading the bit before. So for example, you've got a section where it says do not trigger any rules, or oh yes, your unit is not eligible to declare, but eligible to declare is a charge is in bold. So you might just skim read them and go, well, it says I'm eligible to declare a charge, but then you're missing out the not bit in advance. But it does make visually a very kind of messy page. But I guess potentially the bold text is just, drawing your eye to those things. So maybe it's fine. So the advanced move is going to be the same as before, as is your normal move. Your fallback move is pretty much going to be the same as well. But there are requirements before. God, British is very difficult for me to read here. While moving and also after moving. So it's called an ordered retreat. So select a fallback mode. You make an ordered retreat if your unit is not battle shocked. You can select this mode, or you're making a desperate escape. So otherwise, you must make this mode, make a hazard roll for each model in that unit. Now, while moving, desperate escape, each model moved can be moved through enemy models. So your unit is engaged. Your unit must move as described in moving. So before moving, select a fallback move. So you can select it. So I guess you can opt to do desperate escape, and you can only select ordered if you're not battle shocked, which makes sense. So you can, if you want to try and get past models, same as you currently can, select a desperate escape. And then it says, obviously, after moving, your unit must be unengaged until the end of the turn, unless otherwise stated. Your unit is not eligible to shoot, declare a charge, start an action. And for desperate escape, if your unit is not battle shocked, you must make a battle shock roll for your unit. So you've got a chance of being battle shocked, which I feel like is the same as it currently is. And then they've got a little bit on what is selecting a mode, which is what we get. So obviously with the fallback move, they've sort of defined things into more steps, and they've broken things down, sort of rules within rules, which, from a sort of tournament point of view, makes far more sense. I guess it just makes things maybe a bit more wordy than if it was just a short paragraph of something. So shooting phase. So you get start of shooting phase, your shooting, and your end of shooting phase. You select units and you can make different types of shooting. That unit is eligible to make and resolve. With the units, you can select one of the following below. So normal move, assault shooting, close quarter shooting, and indirect shooting. So I sort of feel like that is different, because before it used to be, this is a new thing. So they're giving you different types of shooting. It used to be weapon profiles had specific things. Whereas I feel like this is now breaking it down further. So when you are shooting, you are doing a specific thing. So select one friendly unit that is eligible to shoot. Then you're selecting a type of shooting. So obviously your entire unit has to do the same type of shooting. So you've got your normal shooting, which is specifically calling out that you can't do an action, which historically I think used to be in the action rules, not in the shooting rules. Then you've got assault shooting. If all of the following apply to your unit, unengaged. So you've got to be unengaged and made an advanced move this turn, and you've got one or more assault weapons. Your unit, as described, makes an attack. You can only select assault weapons to make an attack with. And then after shooting until the end of the phase, your unit's not eligible to shoot. So it feels like this is just replacing the assault rule that it used to be previously. the assault keyword. So this is sort of explaining how that works. Close quarter shooting is going to be, well, this is in theory replacing the pistols rule. So it used to be you had pistols, now it's called close quarter shooting. And this makes more sense because it allows things that weren't armed with pistols to effectively have pistol weapons and still shoot in combat. So from a sort of games realism, this makes a lot more sense. So you've obviously got to be engaged, not made an advanced move that turn, has one or more close quarter weapons, or is a monster and vehicle. What is a monster? Yes, because obviously before you could, this is, I guess, rolling in big guns never tie into the close quarter shooting rule. So your unit shoots as described in the making action. While shooting, models in your unit can target enemy units. Monsters and vehicle models, each time a monster and vehicle model in the unit makes an attack, unless that attack is made with a close quarter weapon and targets a unit it is engaged with, subtract 1 from the hit roll. Wait, so let's read that again. Unless you're making an attack with a close quarter weapon and you target a unit that is engaged with, you are -1 to your hit roll. So I guess if you, because I guess, are you only targeting? Because could you shoot out of combat before? No, you couldn't. I thought you could. No, you could. You couldn't. You had to kill the thing first. That was it. So you're basically shooting at an engaged unit. And you're going to be -1 to hit unless you've got close quarter weapons. If the attack made has the blast weapon, it still cannot target a unit it's engaged with. Okay, so yeah, so the bit I sort of skipped over, it says while shooting, models in your unit can target enemy units your unit is engaged with. So the idea is you're not sort of shooting out of combat, you're shooting into combat. That makes perfect sense. So same as before, you effectively need the close quarter weapon or you're -1 to hit. And if you have blast, you still can't shoot at all. Makes perfect sense. Non-monsters and non-vehicle models can only select close quarter weapons and only target enemy units that are engaged with. You can only select close quarter weapons to make attacks with, and you can only select enemy units that you are engaged with to be the target. So weirdly, monsters and vehicles don't have that stipulation, but it does say while shooting, enemy models can target enemy units you're engaged with each time a monster or vehicle unit makes an attack, unless the attack is made with close quarter weapons and the targets the unit is engaged with, subtract 1 from the hit roll. So it feels like monsters and vehicles can shoot out of combat and they don't get the -1, right? Am I going mad? It sort of feels like you can do that. And then after shooting, until the end of the phase, your unit is not eligible to to start an action. So yeah, it feels like I always hate sort of double negative unless the attack is made with a close quarter weapon and the target is engaged, you're -1 to hit roll. So the implication is you can still shoot non-close combat weapons at non-engaged units and you're not -1 to hit, I believe. But it's like a weird sort of, you're giving me the negative, not the positive. But then it specifically says models in your units can target enemy units that you're engaged with, but not stating that you can obviously shoot it outside of combat. So I guess the idea is you could do both. And hold on, let's just double check the rules. So normal shooting is eligible. You've got to be unengaged. So you can't do normal shooting. But you do have to specifically select a type of shooting and resolve that. So if you're in combat, you're always doing close quarter shooting, even if you want as a monster or vehicle to shoot out of combat. So I believe that is the case, but it's like you've got to thread that needle to find that that's actually possible. It doesn't explicitly state you can, but it doesn't state you can't, which is odd. Okay, but we sort of got there in the end. And the fact that they give you all this detail and not just say designers note, yeah, like they can do it, like would have been helpful. Indirect shooting, so eligible if all the following apply to your unit. So you've got to be unengaged, You can't have made an advanced move. You've got to have one or more indirect weapons. So indirect fire weapons in your unit can target units that are not visible to the attacking model. Each time an indirect fire weapon makes an attack, the target has the benefits of cover by default, which is -1 to hit, I believe. You cannot re-roll the hit rolls, which is really interesting. And then an unmodified hit roll of 1 to 5 fails unless your unit remains stationary. This unit and the target is visible to one or more friendly units, in which case an unmodified hit roll of 1 to 3. God, okay, right, I'm going to have to zoom in on this because it's a bit difficult to see. 1 to 3 is a fail. And then after shooting, can't also do an action. Unmodified hit roll of 1 to 5 fails automatically. So you're only hitting on 6s. It's like, just say that. Just say you can only hit on 6. Unless your unit remains stationary this turn and the target is visible to one or more friendly units. In which case a modified hit roll of 1 to 3 fails instead. I guess they don't want to say, because they could just say 4+ again. But I guess they're doing the stipulation of the physical thing is by saying 1 to 5, 1 to 3 fails, whereas you could 6+ is a success and then a 4+ is a success, which, feels like it would be less words. But it is what it is. I also thought snap shooting was a thing and was a defined thing, in being a 6+ is only hit for things like Overwatch. So you would have thought you would just say, the unit can only snap shoot unless, and that covers all of those things. So yeah, odd that they haven't consolidated that into the snap shooting rule. Or at least referenced it. Right, charge phase. So start of charge phase, charging, and end of charge. So things have changed here as well. So you declare a charge, you select one friendly unit that has not declared a charge, and select, let's not miss out that first paragraph, because that's the important bit, I believe. The active player resolves charges with eligible units one at a time using the sequence below until all other units they choose to charge with have declared a charge, and those charges have been resolved. So you say 1, declare a charge. So you select a friendly unit that has not declared a charge this phase and is eligible to declare a charge. That unit declares a charge. So my unit declaring a charge, same as before. A unit is eligible to declare a charge if they're on the battlefield, unless otherwise stated. Ooh, interesting. Here are some rules that prevent a unit from being eligible to declare a charge. So they're not within 12 inches of one or more enemy units. They're engaged. They've made an advance or fallback move this turn. Makes perfect sense. I assume when you make an advance or fallback move, let's go up. Does it actually specifically state in those rules that you then can't declare a charge? So we've got shooting. Let's go back to movement. So I've made an advance move. So after moving, your unit must be unengaged until the start of turn, unless otherwise stated. Your unit is not eligible to declare a charge or start an action. So they are repeating themselves, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because it is used to know, because you might skip over those things. So I would actually say that is good, even though it is repeating yourself. But sometimes repetition is good in the required places. And we're talking about charges, so it would make sense to give you all the reasons why you might not be able to do a charge. So the next step is to make a charge roll. So you make a charge roll by doing 2d6, and that's your maximum distance of the charge. And you may attempt a charge. If possible, make a charge move. And if you still want to make a charge move with that unit, see opposite. Otherwise, your unit does not make a charge move. In either case, the charge is then resolved. So the main key difference here is that you are rolling your dice first, then you get to measure and pick units that you want to charge into. Whereas before you had to be very specific and go, I want to charge this unit, or I want to try and multi-charge, and then see what my dice are. But it would be much more likely to fail. So this makes charging happen much more likely, because you're just going to roll the dice and see. This is what Age of Sigmar does. Love it in Age of Sigmar. You do get sometimes a choice where you make that dice roll and then you go, maybe actually, I don't want to make that charge after all. but it just speeds things up because you don't get this paralysis of, oh, do I want to take the risk by trying to charge this one, or do I want to go for the one that's further away? It's like, no, just roll the dice. And then if you get that 12-inch and you can go for that further unit, you can just do it. So that is great. So it talks about making the charge move. Also talks about targets no longer eligible or viable, because some people like Dark Elder have shenanigans and stratagems that allow them to move further away, and they're no longer visible, or you can't reach them anymore. It probably just says you can just declare another target instead. So you're eligible to declare a charge. What is the effect? You are moving them. So the key thing here, before moving, select one or more enemy units that are within 12 inches of your unit and within the maximum distance of your the unit in terms of the maximum distance of dice that you've rolled, noted at top. When this first came out on social media, our buddy Tim was a bit confused by this, because he was like, I've still got to select my targets and then make the dice. But it's like, no, you're rolling first, then you are seeing if you are within range. So when moving, each model must end its move close to one or more of the charged target. Each model that can end its move within 1 inch of one or more charged targets must do so. Each model that can end its move engaged with one or more targets can do so. And let's just reread this. Before moving, select one or more enemy units that are within 12 inches of your unit and within the maximum distance. Okay, so you do, when it comes to measuring, need to effectively measure base to base, but you don't actually have to move base to base. This is the interesting shenanigans tactics, maybe. This is quite good because on one hand, it clears up things like deep striking. So now you're deep striking 8 inches away. But you still need a 9 inches away. You got to be outside of 8 inches technically, so your 9 inches still makes sense. So let's talk about that when we get to that section. But it's it doesn't make sense with the maths in terms of they've changed deep striking distances, but you'll still need a 9-inch charge, which still makes sense because you will still be slightly over 8 inches, so you'll need to be 9 inches or more. So yeah, you got to move closer to the target. If you can be within an inch, you have to be within an inch, but you don't have to be base to base, which is interesting. And then each model that can end up being engaged, so within 2 inches, must also do that. After moving, your unit is engaged with all of the charged targets, so you can charge multiple targets. Your unit cannot be engaged with one or more enemy units that are not the charged targets, but if you could be, you would have just selected them to be the charged targets. I guess you might not have if for some reason you couldn't reach them. Also, that's interesting, because you can only select units to be the charge if they are within. Select one or more enemy units that are within 12 inches of your unit and within the maximum distance of the dice that you've rolled. So your charge distance, they are the charged targets. But at the end, your unit cannot be engaged with one or more enemy units that are not the charged targets. So here's an interesting thing. You can have one unit that is slightly out of reach. Let's say it's 10 inches away. You need a 9 to get to this other unit, right? The closer unit that you want to charge into. So by that logic, though, you roll a 9, you don't get the 10, so they're not eligible to be for charged targets. But then you can't move within engagement range of them, which is 2 inches. So you can't end, I mean, you will still end up in combat, but you'll be further away, right? You won't be able to go base to base, even though you have the movement to do it, because your other unit this other unit could kind of screen you out, which is like an interesting tactic now. So you could have double up with one unit behind another, and if they don't get the charge to that one, I mean, maybe that's just a bit niche in terms of depending on what your role is, but that could really affect some things. But then you get things like piling, so it probably is a bit of a moot point by the end of it. But yeah, it means you could end up tagging in things eventually. It also says until the end of the turn, each model in that unit has fights first. So you charge, you get fights first. That is same as before. Then we get an example of making a charge move, and then we get the fight phase. Okay, so fight phase, you have start of a fight phase, then you have the pile-in move, which is now different. So both players make pile-in moves with each of their eligible units that they choose to move. The eligible if section describes which units are eligible to make such moves. The players whose turn it is resolve all of their moves first, and then followed by their opponent, so the active player. Each player cannot make more than one pile-in move during this step. So each unit cannot make more than one pile-in move. That makes sense. So this is good. All the units pile in. Me as the active player, I'll pile in all mine. Then you as the defender, pile in all of yours. It sort of stops you using pile-in to sort of scoop around into other units or towards objectives and gain extra movement. You're basically getting ready for a ruckus, which feels much more suitable. So let's quickly go through this. So the maximum distance you can move is 3 inches. You're eligible if it's for fight phase and one or more of the following apply. You're engaged. You made a charge move this turn. If it was selected to make an overrun fight this phase, which is something we need to get into. The effect is you move as described in movements. So before moving, select your pile-in targets. If your unit is engaged, select every enemy unit it is engaged with. Those are the pile-in targets. Otherwise, select one or more enemy units within 5 inches of your unit. So potentially there's, I was going to say potentially there's a chance that, you know, you piled in and then somebody's killed a unit and you're not there. So it seems a niche thing that you have charged and you're somehow not within engagement range of anyone. I guess so there is some caveat. So you make a charge and then you do some kind of mortal wounds on the charge, right? So whether you've used a stratagem, like it to do impact damage, you've killed that unit because it only had like maybe a model left. And now you can do a pile-in move into another unit. So actually, yeah, it makes sense why they've done that. With can't move, and then each model that is moved must end its move closer to the closest pile-in target, which is a unit, not model, and engaged with if possible. Then after moving, your unit is still engaged. Each model that started this move engaged with an enemy unit must still be engaged with that enemy unit. So you can't sneakily pile into one unit and move out of combat with another unit. Again, not on a per model basis, which is sometimes a bit confusing. So you can technically, I guess, move away from a particular model to go towards a different model. Let's just double check that. So if your unit is engaged, select every enemy unit is engaged with. Models in base contact with one or more enemy models cannot be moved. It doesn't actually say. It just sort of stipulates a before and after, but individually, I guess you can sort of go wherever you want in that move, so long as you move closer. Yeah, because you just move closer to the piling target. That's it. So I guess there is a bit more freedom there in terms of what you can do, which will be interesting to see how people potentially abuse that, but who knows. So we've got some examples of your pile-ins. Then you've got the fight phase. So a unit is eligible to fight if it has not already been selected to fight. It's got to be engaged, or it was engaged at the start of a step, which it might not be, and it also made or if it made a charge move. So pretty similar to before. Players resolve the following sequence. So you resolve fight first combats, starting with the player whose turn it is. So this includes charging, or if you your Emperor's Children, you got fight first. Players alternate selecting one that fights first unit that is eligible to fight first, and the unit is selected to fight. See below. So this is nice that it's a bit different than from before. And if there are no fights first units that are eligible to fight, resolve the remaining combats. And then, so resolving combats, starting with the player who just moved this sequence onto this step. Hold on. Resolve remaining combat. So normally this is the person who's unactive goes first, but it says starting with the player who's just moved this sequence onto this step. Weirdly worded. Players alternate selecting one friendly unit that is eligible to fight that unit is selected to fight. If it is not possible, if there are no units that are eligible to fight, the fight step ends. Otherwise, the other player selects the next unit. Hold on. So if there are no fights first units that are eligible to fight, move to the resolve remaining combat step, where this player will select their next unit. Resolve the remaining combat steps where this player... What's that mean? Now, my assumption is everyone that charges, so gets fights first. So it should go on that the person who didn't just charge gets to now fight next in the remaining combats. But if I have fights first and you have fights first, and we resolve the fights first by you as the defender fighting last out of all the fights first sequences, if that makes sense. So, for example, I do my charge, we fight, you do your fights first, we fight, and then let's say that's it. There was just those two units fighting. Then, because you finished the fights first last, starting with the player who just moved this sequence onto the step, players alternate selecting one friendly unit is eligible to fight, and that unit is selected to fight if it's not possible. So, I mean, does it mean if you finished with the fights first, I then get to fight next? So we're still alternating? Or starting with the player who just moved this sequence onto this set. This is awful wording, right? It makes no sense. It's not very clear what they're trying to say. So either we alternate all the time, or basically whoever started the fights first sequence then also finishes the resolving the remaining combats, which is maybe what it should be, right? Or it's the person that didn't do that. So it's meant to be it's the non-active player that turn. That's what it used to say. It used to basically be like it's the person that didn't go first this turn starts. But it's saying it's the player who just moved this sequence onto this step. Is that the active player? I don't know. Confusing. Like, or are we alternating? I mean, I could go around in circles. This is where I need an extra person to give me some insight. Tell me in the comments below, because maybe it means me as the active player, I do all my fights first stuff. And then after that, I also do all of my remaining combats, which is different because it's normally the other person that does all their remaining combats first. So yeah, who knows what they're trying to say here. So after resolving the fights in the resolve remaining combat step, if there are no more fights first units, they are now eligible to fight. When then return to the resolve fights first combat step. After resolving a fight in the resolving remaining combat step, if there are one or more fights first units that are now eligible to fight, resolve to fight. Okay, so if you somehow, when you're fighting, end up somehow tagging in another unit, even though you don't well, maybe you could deconsolidate, unless I thought consolidation was going to be done at the very end. So, but if you can somehow activate another unit that has fights first, you immediately go back to doing that. Talks about overruns, so let's briefly look at what that is. So when a unit makes an overrun fight, its models can be moved such that enemy units, when they are unengaged, become engaged. So this is where it's talking about you could tag in a fights first unit. Such enemy units become eligible to fight this phase, and may even be able to fight next. If they are one of the fights first units. So it's interesting that it's talking about something that they have yet to specify, although looking at the screen, it's the next thing down, basically. So it's somewhat confusing. It's like the chicken is coming before the egg in this instance. So you can make a normal fight. Your unit is engaged, your unit fights by describing making attacks. An overrun fight, your unit is unengaged or was unengaged at the start of the fight phase, but became engaged during the fight phase. Your unit can make one additional pile-in move, then fights as described in the making attacks. So your unit is unengaged, or was unengaged at the start of the fight step, but became engaged during. Yeah, I guess, let's say you charge in, you kill a thing from your charge phase with some impact hits. You're not near anything. You could still pile in. You are still, can you still do that? Hold on. Because you're piling in. Select a pile and move. You're not unengaged. You're not engaged. So otherwise, select one or more enemy units within 5 inches of that unit. So I guess you have to have another unit within 5 inches. If not, you don't get to make a pile in move. Well, you don't have to make the targets, but each model must end its move closer to the pile-in target. It's engaged. It made a charge move, so you are eligible. Okay, so here's a weird niche case. So you charge a unit, you kill it on the charge. There are no units within 5 inches. You can still technically make a pile-in move, but there's no stipulation as to which direction you need to go in. If there is a unit within 5 inches, you have to move towards them. But I think you can still just make a move, because there are some stipulations while moving, but there's nothing saying you're not eligible to make a pile-in move because you've done your charge, and that's the only thing that's needed. So you can kind of move 5 inches, like 3 inches in any direction at that point. You could then make the overrun fight and still make a pile-in move another 3 inches, and then potentially you can start fighting. If your unit makes one additional pile-in move, then fights as described in making attacks. Yeah. So interestingly, you can get a lot of movement out of this. It's very niche, basically, and you've kind of got to kill something on the charge, basically, because it doesn't seem like you can fight and then kill something, then fight again. Unless I'm completely missing something out. It feels more like this is designed when multiple units are charging one unit. But yeah, so that's interesting how they've done that. It feels like you'll need to play this a few times to really get to understand the benefit of this overrun fight sequence, but it feels like it should stop units from just being stuck out in the middle of nowhere, so combat will be much more interesting. So give us examples here of a normal fight, an overrun fight, where I'm assuming this big thing kills a unit, and then this thing gets to pile in and make some extra attacks, for example. Then we've got the consolidate step. So both players make consolidation moves with all of their eligible units. The player whose turn it is resolves all of their moves first, followed by their opponent. See, why don't they just say that for the turn order for, resolving the rest of your fights? Until each unit cannot make more than one consolidation move during this step. Makes perfect sense. This is mind-bending. So you make a maximum move of 3 inches. You're eligible if it's the fight phase and your unit was eligible to fight this phase. The effect is you do a 3-inch move, but before moving, select one consolidation mode. So you get ongoing consolidation, engaging consolidation, or objective consolidation. So if your unit is engaged, you must select this mode and select every enemy unit it is engaged with. If you're consolidating, that was ongoing. Now, if you're engaging, otherwise, if your unit is within 3 inches of one or more enemy units, you must select this mode and select one or more of those enemy units. So basically, a unit that is over 2 inches away, basically between 2 and 3 inches. And then the other option is objective consolidation. Otherwise, if this unit is within 3 inches of one or more objectives, you must select this mode and select one of those objectives. So while you're moving, if you're doing ongoing, models in base-to-base contact with one or more enemy models cannot be moved. Each model that is moved must move its move closer to the closest enemy unit and engaged with where possible. So when you're consolidating, you have to basically be engaged. Again, it doesn't say base to base, which is interesting. So I guess the idea is, in general, you don't want to move to base because that's just stopping you. But you do have to move closer. So that is important. So you're always you might get there eventually. If you're engaging, so each model that moved must move closer to the closest enemy unit and engage with where possible. And then the objective one is each model that is moved must end its move within range of the selected objective if possible, or closer if it's not. So you can just move towards the objective, but the objective's got to be within 3 for this to trigger. And then you must move within its range. So in theory, you could be, if your unit's within 3 inches of one or more objects. So you could, in theory, be on the objective already, right? And then you can just move around on that objective, I'm assuming, because each model it moved must end its move within range of the selected objective, if possible, or closer to it, if not. So yeah, I think you get a bit of, because obviously it's area terrain now is what most of the objectives are, you get some options to wiggle around and move about on that objective. Then after moving, again, you've got these 3 different things. So if you're ongoing, each model that started this move engaged with an enemy model must be engaged with that enemy unit. If you're engaging, your unit must be engaged with all of the selected enemy units. If one or more enemy units engaged with your unit have been selected to fight this phase, your opponent must select each of those units one at a time. When each is selected, it becomes eligible to fight and is selected to fight. So obviously this is the tagging in new units. So they are now eligible to fight. And if you're on an objective, your unit must be within range of the selected objective. And then it's the end, thank God, of the fight phase. Here's the thing. They could have broken this down into sort of effectively 3 separate moves going, cool, you're ongoing, here's the before, while, and after. You're engaging, here's this one. And then I sort of get it. I feel like they're being a bit restricted by their sort of design format here. And maybe they'd have been better off splitting this out into sort of effectively 3 different consolidation moves, just so you're sort of laser focused into the exact one that you're doing, rather than making it this big meaty text of which you're only ever referring to 1/3 of the rules. So that is interesting. Give us some examples. Great. Give us some pretty pictures. Great. So next up is battlefields and tactics. First of all, we've got placing terrain. So before the battle, place a section of the terrain feature on the battlefield using one or more of the following methods. So place a well-defined boundary, such as a base or mat, in each location you want to furnish with terrain, then place one or more terrain features wholly within that boundary. So this is potentially using those new sort of objective terrain, sort of area terrain pieces that Games Workshop is going to be providing with us. So you got that is your kind of area footprint of your terrain, and then you're placing actual terrain on top of them. So place one terrain feature directly on the battlefield, place 2 or more terrain features directly on the battlefield in such a way together that they define the boundary of an area. Interesting. I guess that is that like the 2 halves that can form a whole one that we get in the Games Workshop stuff, or is it? I don't know. All right, yeah. So you got your well-defined boundary, which is your area terrain, or you can have one piece, just stick it down, or you have 2 or more to define an area together. So this might just be your ruins, as you normally would do, and place them down, and I guess the corners will define your boundary of your terrain. So they're your 3 different ways. In each case, the area of battle occupied by that boundary or terrain feature is known as the terrain area. A mission deployment map may define the locations and dimensions of each terrain area, otherwise players must agree on this beforehand. So that all makes perfect sense. I think basically the main stipulation here is that well-defined boundary piece where you're then putting terrain on top is the new one, which will correspond with all the different battle maps that we're going to be getting. So terrain categories, there are different types. You've got exposed, which offers scant protection, that can be traversed without hindrance. So examples are crates, razor wire, scattered debris. So this basically gives you, I believe, no cover whatsoever. Then we have light, which is provides cover from incoming attacks, but will not slow enemy advance, but offer lasting defense. So this is barricades, low walls, or statutory. So this is probably, I'm going to assume, give us the benefits of cover. And then dense. So dense terrain is an obstacle to even the largest war machines and can shelter entire squads from enemy sight. So examples are buildings, ruins, armored containers, and woods. Interestingly, an armored container isn't exposed, which is what it used to be when you stood on top. A mission deployment map may define which terrain categories should be present in which of the area terrains. Meeting these requirements will create the best gaming experience. Note that terrain features sharing the same category area can belong to different terrain categories. Okay, cool. So I haven't necessarily explained exactly what those different categories do, but hopefully we'll get to that. So placing terrain on a map. So you've got your terrain area, which is your map, and then you've got your ruins, which is your dense terrain that you get placed on top. And then sometimes you get your terrain, which is dense terrain, and then smaller bits, which is light terrain, also there. And I believe these are color coordinated in the deployment maps that Games Workshop are providing with us. So here we go. Terrain and movement, they can affect them in different ways. So exposed and light, all models can move horizontally and vertically through exposed and light terrain. So noting, and this is similar to before, things like light terrain, which I think was basically 4 inches and below is how it was defined in the current edition. Basically, even vehicles could just move through that completely freely. It wasn't that well clarified in the rules. I think it was in the tournament pack, maybe. It was sort of quite hidden away, that rule. For dense, which is basically ruins for the most part. But interestingly, it did also say it was crates as well. So those armored crates, which are dense, and normally you would just move up and around them. But now they're dense. So infantry, beast swarms, and mobile models can move horizontally through dense terrain features. Be interesting to see what mobile actually means. Infantry, beast, and swarm models can move vertically through dense terrain features. So mobile might be like mobile gun platforms potentially, which would make sense. They can move through them but not be up on other floors. Other models can move horizontally through dense terrain features, provided that all sections of the terrain feature that the model's moving that the moving model's base would move through are 2 inches or less in height. So this is similar to that older rule that I was talking about. So you can move through it as long as it's 2 inches or less. And that basically has got to cover the sort of the size of the base. Otherwise, the models must move vertically to ascend or descend such sections. They cannot move through ceilings and floors while doing so, and they cannot end the move on any surface of a terrain feature that is not on a ground level. So basically it's saying you can't move up and across it on a rooftop, but if it's just a wall, you can sort of move it up and down it, basically. Moving vertically to ascend or descend terrain feature, that model must remain within a ½ inch horizontally of the terrain feature. The distance moved vertically up and the distance moved vertically down to any other distances the model has moved since it has begun. Setting up or ending a move. Models can be set up or end a move on the ground level of terrain features. Models can also be set up or end a move on any surface of a terrain feature that is not a ground level if all of the following apply. So it's one of the following: infantry, beast, swarm, fly, or monster. And after ending that move, the model is stable and no part of the base overhangs the outer edge of that surface. Super sensible stuff, basically. I think these are pretty much similar to before. I think, yeah, monsters could go up onto other floors. You just didn't really see it happen all that often. And the fact that you can't have overhanging is also very sensible as well. Also, briefly mentions that sometimes you can get things like plunging fire, but is referring us to later parts. Then they're giving us some examples of moving. So this monster here, all sections of this dense terrain feature are more than 2 inches in height. So this monster cannot move through it and must move around it instead. However, it could actually move up and over it according to the rules, which is what they've not provided in that example. They've sort of said go around, which I think is maybe a bit of a poor example, but I don't know if they've done that because of this thing here. So these infantry models can move through dense features as if they're as if they're walls, as in the current edition. Then they've given us some examples of other dense terrain. I guess, these are thick pieces. So a vehicle model cannot move through dense terrain features, but it can move vertically to ascend and descend, which is similar to what we've got here. So that model could in theory go up and over, but they've shown it going around. It can move up and over there. This infantry model can move vertically and then it's move on top of the surface, but also noting it can also just move through it as well, right? Which is not an example they're giving us here. And the infantry model is not being moved over or through any terrain features and can just move through the terrain area. Okay, so this is all pretty straightforward. So they've given us some examples, but not necessarily all of the examples. I guess the moving through, they've kind of given it to us there in terms of dense terrain. But because these are walls, that feels like quite obvious. It would have also been good to maybe show it going through the crate, whereas the monster has to go up and over. So you get a comparison between the two. That would have been a bit more helpful, I think. And we get terrain and visibility. So you get the benefits of cover, hidden, obscuring, and solid rules. So that's a new one. Benefits of cover: each time a ranged attack targets a unit, if every model in that unit meets one or more of the following conditions, that unit has the benefits of cover. So the model is infantry, beast, and swarm keyword and is within a terrain feature. It doesn't have to be wholly within, it just needs to be within. That model is not fully visible to the attacking models due to one or more intervening terrain features and or one or more intervening obscuring terrain features. So basically you've got to either be in terrain or partially obscured by a terrain feature, which feels sort of similar to how it currently is. But rather than getting +1 to your save, you now get the benefits of cover, which worsens your the attacker's ballistic skill characteristic by 1. Note is specifically the ballistic characteristic, not the dice roll, which means you could potentially have other modifiers affecting it as well, potentially. But I don't think there's many that do, but it'd be interesting to see. Then there's also hidden, which is a new concept that has been well explained on Warhammer Community. So a model is hidden while all of the following apply. That model is infantry, beast, and swarm keyword and is within an area terrain that contains one or more dense terrain features. So it's got to have a dense keyword, which is basically a ruin for most intents purposes. That model's unit did not make one or more ranged attacks during this turn or during the previous turn. Doesn't mean it can't make an attack still later on during the turn, but can't have made one currently, which is interesting because it certainly benefits the person going second, because the first person could potentially be having to do all the shooting first, and then the second person could stay hidden during the opponents, but then react, right? So going second definitely gives you a benefit to being hidden. While a model is hidden, it can only be visible to enemy models that are within its detection range, unless otherwise stated. A model's detection range is 15 inch. So it's effectively like a lone op that's a 15-inch range for everyone, which is going to drastically change how the game plays. Going to really prioritize like short range shooting, getting into detection range, prioritize combat potentially. But noting the key thing is this only works while you're not shooting yourself and didn't shoot the previous turn. So this is a kind of concept that was in Kill Team, where basically you could not shoot, you could sneak around behind different cover and basically be protected, which was a bit of a pain, to be honest, because that one was so difficult in Kill Team to actually be able to see them while they're wanting to stay hidden. But this one's like an interesting concept, and it's not like you're hidden all the time. It's on a unit per unit basis. So if I've got 2 units, one's within 15 inches of one of your units, you aren't hidden to that unit. But if I've got a unit outside of 15-inch range, you are hidden from that unit. You've also got obscuring, which I'm pretty sure is the same as before. So terrain areas containing one or more light or dense terrain features are obscuring terrain areas. So interestingly, you don't have to have ruins to be obscuring now, but it does need to be a terrain area, but could just be filled with light terrain, not just dense terrain. If every line of sight drawn between 2 models crosses one or more obscuring terrain areas, excluding obscuring terrain areas, excluding obscuring terrain areas that one or both of those models are within, those 2 models are not visible to each other. So basically you have to be wholly behind a terrain feature, not within it, and You can't have a model poking out like such when it's partially visible, because then you lose obscuring. Exactly, basically how the current obscuring rules. We now have solid as well. So solid is dense terrain features have the solid rule. Line of sight cannot be drawn across any enclosed gap in the surface of such a terrain feature that is 3 inches or less from the ground level. So this is the ITC format of enclosed windows. The ground floor is a solid brick that cannot be shot through or you can see through, is now a rule. Basically, I'm not sure I was personally a fan of that, but Games Workshop's terrain has lots of holes in. I think some of the more recent kits did a better job of covering up some of those windows, but I kind of like the fact that if you're in a ruin, you can be shot through it. Now it's basically saying, nah, you can't do that whatsoever, which is such an ITC thing. Well done, ITC. Changing the game once again. I'm not sure I'm a huge fan of this, because then it basically really overemphasizes combat units. To an extent, it'd be interesting to see what the terrain is that comes out, because there are, as we've said, this is for dense terrain features. So, for example, you've got your radar station, for example, being hidden behind that radar station, and to be obscured would be quite difficult because it's not really going to block much. Similarly, tall things may be behind crates that are really tall. They won't be hidden either. So for those dense terrain features, this rule will actually kind of make sense. But things like ruins, which often offer a lot of cover anyway, and you can hide models behind if you sort of position yourself right well, I don't really think it needs it as much in quite the same way, because I don't like the idea that if this was a unit, if you're watching along, if you're in audio format, you're suffering here, I'm afraid. But if you've got a unit in ruins and directly outside, you've got a unit that they can't see each other, even though there's some windows there and they should be visible. I find that quite frustrating. I want to be able to shoot the stuff inside that unit, especially now that now that area of terrain could be an objective. So they are saying solid, dense terrain features that are free in enclosed gaps in the surfaces of such a terrain feature that is 3 inches or less from the ground level. A solid rule. Line of sight cannot be drawn across any enclosed gaps in the surface of such a terrain feature that is 3 inches or less from ground level. So I'm assuming they're talking about the gap is 3 inches or less from the ground level. Yeah, interesting. So I guess if you've got something that's quite high, that's still below maybe like 3 to 4 inches, so it's still on the ground floor, those you could still shoot through potentially. So for maybe bigger things, they can still be shot. So that's worth noting, that the 3 inches or less is quite important for the gaps. So that's wholly dependent basically on how the terrain looks basically. So it has a designer's note. So let's read what that says. It says, this rule ensures that models are not visible while sheltering in ground level terrain, irrespective of small openings such as doors, windows, or bullet holes, or because of smaller gaps between adjacent terrain features, which I think is quite a good one, because sometimes if you've got several terrain features, like the whole wall isn't actually like hiding you. So I guess sometimes then it does make sense. Or because of small gaps between adjacent terrain features, 3 inches is the height of the first floor of many terrain features, but some missions may adjust the height of which these rules take effect. Interesting. So here's a good example. Basically, you've got these gaps in these terrain and you can't shoot them. I guess here, this is interesting because it's also talking about that's obscuring and it's less to do with that particular rule. This one here, however, so let's say it's talking about between D and B. So it says there is an obscuring terrain area between all models in units A and D. So none of them are visible. Okay, cool. We care about B and D. All models in units B and C are within the terrain area and are inventory, so are hidden. However, D's models are within 15 inches section range of this unit. B's models, unit C, but not unit C. So unit B's models are visible to unit D. Unit D models are also visible to the models in unit B and C, since they are not in the terrain area. However, that's completely ignoring solid. So if you look here, these models, Unit B is completely behind this low-hanging wall. Now, maybe this is actually light terrain. So if this, however, was dense terrain and therefore solid, these wouldn't be visible. And I think that's it, because these smaller pieces tend to be light terrain. So yeah, I don't necessarily like that. Here's the example of solid. You've got 2 units. If there's like minuscule gaps, I totally understand. But if there's a giant gap and I've got a big unit directly in front of that giant gap, I feel like I should be able to shoot through it, but not anymore, which is a shame, but does allow things to be a bit more survivable. So now we get on to objectives. So we've got terrain objectives. If a mission uses objectives, it will state where they are located on the battlefield. Typically, your mission will have a deployment map showing several points where objectives should be placed. The location of each point should coincide with a terrain area. The terrain area is the objective and is called terrain objective. When measuring distances to and from an objective, measure to and from the closest part of it. So this, I imagine, is all the same. So we're going to skip over level of control. It's your OC on your unit. Basically, you need to have more OC than your opponent to hold that objective. If both have the same level of control, unless the objective is secured, see below, that objective is not controlled by either player. It used to be called contested. So while one or more units from your player's army is within range of an objective that players control, for each of those units that contains one or more models with an OC characteristic of one or more, that unit is said to be controlling that objective. Quite straightforward. Secured objectives. Some rules allow an objective to be secured by a player. When an objective is secured by a player's army, that objective remains under their control, even if they no longer have units within range of it, until their opponent's level of control over that objective is greater than theirs at the end of a phase. This was always called like sticky objectives by people. So this used to be a datasheet rule that is so common and prevalent, it's now become a core rule. So I guess some people will just have secured objectives, I assume, on that datasheet instead now. So that makes sense. And then you've got some examples of taking a terrain objective. Vehicles, for example, just need to tow in to that objective to have their influence of their OC. They don't need to be fully within it, which is good. I have seen people talk about like, well, I'll just take a Baneblade and I'll try and cover up as much of that area objective as possible. But obviously that's not really feasible most of the time due to where the ruins are placed and things like that. Noting that there's a bit called, says see also objectives not within a terrain area. So that will be interesting to see what that means. Then we are on to stratagems. So using stratagems, you've got how much CP, when you do it, the target effect and restrictions. Each player can use the same stratagem multiple times during the battle, but the following restrictions apply. Each player cannot use the same stratagem more than once in the same phase. Unless otherwise stated, each player cannot target the same unit with more than one stratagem in the same phase. So this is a big change. Units can't stack multiple stratagems. It's going to make them a lot more weaker, but it does say unless otherwise stated. So we might see a bit of kind of creep come in where there will be abilities which will allow you to start stacking stratagems. And I think some of them in some of the current detachments kind of revolve around you sort of overlaying maybe some abilities or stratagems, although that might be more to do with the army rule and the stratagem or some kind of trigger, especially for like things like Chaos Gods and stuff, but I can't quite recall any off the top of my head. Each time you use a stratagem, resolve the following sequence. So you select targets as described in the stratagem, you reduce the cost of your CP. If that stratagem contains a section that carries an additional CP cost, because there might be extra benefits basically, and then you resolve the stratagem. And then there are core stratagems as well. See also modifying CP cost and rules sequencing as well. Okay, so here we've got the classics. So we've got command reroll 1 CP. It also shows us the phase in which it can happen. I mean, I assume the tick means every phase and also can be done by both players, right? So I assume that's what that means. Yeah, stratagem key used by both, used in your turn, used in your opponent's turn. So that's kind of cool. So it specifically affects advance roll, charge roll, damage roll, hazard roll, which I don't think it used to be able to be useful before. Hit roll, save roll, and wound roll, and a roll to determine the number of attacks generated with a weapon. So most of that seems the same. I'm sure hazard wasn't a thing before, but because now hazard goes off on a 1 or 2, that feels a bit fair. You re-roll that roll. Okay. Select one of those dice to re-roll, excluding charge roll, which you must re-roll in full. So you roll both dice for your charge roll. Then we've got explosives, which is 1 CP in shooting phase, in your shooting phase specifically. Select one friendly, unengaged explosive or grenades unit that is eligible to shoot. I assume because grenades is the current keyword, and maybe that's going to be replaced with explosives as codexes roll out, but they've got to, again, it's taking things like the pistol keyword and making it more generic. There are just things that will do explosive damage, maybe, that don't necessarily carry grenades, but they've got to include them both here. So this is, in a way, the downside potentially of just not doing a complete reset where they've you're indexing the army. So this might change in future editions where it'll just reference explosives and not grenades because they're kind of going to be phased out. You can't have made an advance move. You resolve the following sequence. So select one explosive or grenades model in your unit. So interestingly, it's got to be a model. Select one unengaged enemy unit within 6 inches of and visible to that model, and then roll 6d6 for each 4+. That enemy unit suffers 1 mortal wound. So most of that is the same, basically. Then we've got Epic Challenge for 1 CP, which is in both players' turns in the fight phase. So fight phase, just after a friendly character unit is selected to fight, select one character model in your unit. Until the end of the phase, that model's melee weapons have precision, so that's the same as before. Crushing Impact, so this is movement. No, this is charge phase, and again, is in your phase. So your charge phase, just after a friendly monster or vehicle unit has made a charge move, it specifically now includes monsters, not just vehicles. So I think a lot of people will be rejoicing over that, and then other people will be hating that fact. You resolve the following sequence. You select one enemy engaged unit, then you select one model in your unit engaged with that enemy unit. And then you roll a number of d6 equal to the toughness characteristic of that model. For each one, your unit suffers 1 mortal wound, which is a new change, but quite devastating. And then for each 5+, that enemy unit suffers 1 mortal wound to a maximum of 6 mortal wounds per round. Because you could have a toughness characteristic of, say, 12, for example, but it still caps out at 6, which is quite common. So that's good. But being able to now suffer potentially yourself 12 mortal wounds if you had a toughness 12 and you rolled terribly, that's quite devastating. So I think in a way this is good because it will mean there's some pros and cons to it. It's interesting, like they could have tied this in with the hazardous keyword, but obviously hazardous keyword is potentially only going to do 3 mortal wounds. But, you know, this could make it much more swingy. I feel like in a way hazardous would have made more sense in terms of the cleanliness and, you know, tying back to keywords and things like that. And also that it'll be a flat, just, you know, 0 or 3 damage on a dice roll. But that's a 1 in 6 chance. Whereas if you got a toughness 9, I don't know, like you'd probably get 1 mortal wound or 2 mortal wounds, but it could just swing in either way. So this is more random. And in a way it's probably good because it might make people second guess themselves about using it. Then we've got Insane Bravery for 1 CP. So it's the command phase, it's your command phase. Battle Shock step of your command phase. Just before you make a Battle Shock roll, you automatically pass that roll. You cannot use a stratagem more than once per battle. You cannot use a stratagem more than once per battle is the restriction. So I feel like that bit's new. Also, the fact that battle shocked units can't use stratagems. So if you are already battle shocked, you can't use this to become unbattle shocked because of the new rolling on mechanics of battle shock. Otherwise, it's kind of the same, but the fact that you can only use it once per battle. I mean, I don't think that is in the current rules, but I almost never use this, partly because I've mostly been playing Thunder Warriors. And I always assume they've got a good CP, but pretty much every game they get battle shocked at least once or twice because that is how abysmal my dice rolls are. We also have a couple more. So we got Rapid Ingress. So it's your opponent's movement phase. So it's interesting that they've broken them down. So the first page is basically everyone's and the active player's turn. And then the second page is basically your opponent's turn. So yeah, rapid ingress, movement phase, 1 CP, end of your opponent's movement phase, select one friendly unit that's in strategic reserve. You exclude aircrafts because they just do it anyway. You get to make an ingress move. You cannot use this stratagem during the first battle round. So we're on rules 15.07. So it's interesting that even stratagems have their own one. Ingress move doesn't appear until 20. So we've got a way to go until we work out exactly what rapid ingress is. You cannot use a stratagem during the first battle round. That makes sense. Smoke screen is the next one for 1 CP in your opponent's shooting phase. And to the end of that phase, select each time an attack targets either your smoke unit or a unit that is not fully visible to the attacker's model because of one or more models in your smoke unit. The target has the benefits of cover against that attack, so again, -1 to hits. But what's great about this is your Lehman Russ can pop smoke and protect a unit of infantry behind it, for example, or another vehicle. That is really cool and thematic. So I really like that. That's a nice simple little change that they've done. We've now got Fire Overwatch, which is 1 CP. So one friendly unengaged unit, excluding Titanic units. Obviously, this is your opponent's movement phase. Your unit shoots using snap shooting. So it's interesting that snap shooting is specifically part of the Fire Overwatch. It's not just a generic rule that we were talking about before. It's not a form of shooting, which it sort of feels like it should be, but I guess it's just part of Fire Overwatch for some reason. So at the start, stated in the rules allowing this shooting type. So it is a shooting type, but specifically for Fire Overwatch. Your unit shoots as described in making attacks. While shooting, you can only target one visible enemy unit within 24 inches of your unit, and only if it is an eligible target. So you've still got the crazy 24-inch range for shooting like you currently get in Overwatch. Each attack only hits on an unmodified hit roll of 6, irrespective of the attack. There's ballistic skill or any other modifiers, and more importantly, you can't reroll the hit rolls. And then after shooting, until the end of that phase, your unit is not eligible to start an action. I guess there's a potential that you could be doing an action still, but that feels very unlikely. Personally, I don't like the 24-inch range. It's quite mad. I like the fact that it's changed to the end of your opponent's movement phase. It's not after every move or before every move. It's done at a specific phase, like at the end. This is very much like Age of Sigmar in terms of how they do it, so that's much better. It's great that you can only target one enemy unit, which is the same as before, and the fact that you can't reroll hit rolls, I think that's very good. Personally, I would like to see snap shooting basically be like, you can only hit on unmodified 6s and you can't reroll them. That is its own rule. And then you reference that any other time you want to, indirect fire, for example, uses those two. That should just be called snap shooting. That makes obviously way more sense. Obviously would reference a specific thing. So, maybe from their point of view, they're like, I want to do Fire Overwatch. Oh, Fire Overwatch says I do snap shooting. Oh, I've got to find that in a particular page. Maybe they thought that was too convoluted. But once you learn what snap shooting is, just referencing it somewhere else makes more sense in my mind. Then we've got Heroic Intervention for 1 CP. It's going to be the end of your opponent's charge phase. You select one friendly unengaged unit within 12 inches of one or more enemy units, and you can select a vehicle unit if it is a character or walker unit, so things like knights. You resolve a charge with your unit. While doing so, before making the charge roll, you must select one of the following modes. Modes have cropped up again. So Leap to Defend is when selecting charge targets, you can only select enemy units that made a charge move this phase and are within the maximum distance, or Into the Fray. So when making a charge roll, if the result is greater than 6 after modifiers, change it to a 6. When selecting a charge target, you can select enemy units that are within 6 inches of the unit that are within the maximum distance. Okay, so you basically get 2 options. Select a unit that made a charge and you can just charge them no matter what, or you can charge a unit that didn't charge but they've got to be within 6 inches. And I sort of feel like, just say that. Like, you've sort of made it so convoluted by saying if you rolled greater than 6, reduce it down to 6 and you can only target them. Just say you can charge a unit up to 6 inches. Okay, but that also costs you an extra CP, that one. So it's a 1 CP to charge, effectively like counter charge, or 2 CP to just charge into absolutely anything, but you've got to be within 6 inches. So yeah, some combat units are going to really benefit from that, but it's going to cost you an extra CP. And lastly, we've still got counter-offensive, which is still 2 CP. It's at the fight step of your opponent's fight phase, just after an enemy unit has resolved its attacks. One friendly unit that is eligible to fight is going to be the target. And until the end of that phase, your unit has the Fight's First ability, and it must be the next unit you select to fight. So you can basically interrupt a fight phase and fight, same as before. Nothing has changed there. So ultimately, overall, I would say these are all pretty good changes. The Insane Bravery that you can only use it once, I can't remember if that was the same or not. I like the kind of general rewording from grenades to explosives. Crushing Impact now does damage. That's pretty good. Smoke Screen allowing you to protect other units. That's cool. Rapid Ingress is ultimately the same. I think Fire Overwatch can't do rerolls. That's good. And Heroic Intervention allowing you to charge any unit within 6 inches for an extra CP is very cool. I can imagine using that quite a lot. And then Counteroffensive being the same. So yeah, all of those are really good, solid changes. On to actions. So performing actions. In the current edition, this wasn't actually part of the core rules. It was added in the chapter approved decks. In previous edition, in 9th edition, actions were part of the core rules, so it's great to see them back. It makes perfect sense. When you are performing actions, you've obviously got a start, the units that you can apply, a use limit, when it completes, and what that effect is. So when you are starting an action, a unit is eligible to start an action unless one or more of the following apply. So it's not on the battlefield, it's an aircraft or fortification. It is battle shocked. It has an OC characteristic of 0 or dash, which also means it would be battle shocked, but some just have that natively. If it's engaged, unless it's Titanic, so interestingly, Titanic can do it while in combat. If it advanced or made a fallback move this turn, or if it started another action this turn. If the unit starts an action until the end of that turn, it is not eligible to shoot, excluding Titanic units. So Titanic units can shoot while in combat and still do an action. And it also can't be eligible to declare a charge. So if the unit performing an action makes a move excluding piling and consolidation or leaves the battlefield, that unit does not complete the action. Otherwise, when an action is completed, its effects section is triggered. So even though you can't do it, you can't start an action while engaged, there's a small chance that if it's an action that takes over a turn to do, you might be charged, and you can still pile in and consolidate and fight, and still be performing your action. So that is same as how it currently is. And that was it. Now we are on to the advanced rules. So we've got moving monsters and vehicles. So each time you make a normal or advanced move of a monster or vehicle in that unit, it can move through friendly enemy models, excluding other monsters or vehicles. So this is new. So now you can basically move through other models, but specifically monsters and vehicles can't move through other monsters and vehicles, which does make sense. Frame. This was something that they mentioned before. I think this is basically another word for hull. So some models do not have a base. Many of these are monsters or vehicle models. Such models have the frame keyword. Is that even needed? But okay. As do some other large models. However, whenever a rule refers to a model's position in relation to anything else on the battlefield when measuring distances, if that model has the frame keyword, unless otherwise stated, measure to and from the closest point of the model. So not necessarily from its base if it has one, which I guess is why it specifies that. And then when rotating a frame model as part of the move, if that model does not have a base, turn it any amount around from its central axis while keeping it upright. Yeah, I almost feel like this could just be in that kind of, niche core, how things move and get measured from. But I guess there are some examples where vehicles are on bases, but they still have the frame keyword, so you still measure to the hull, and the base is there purely for decoration and stability. So shooting at engaged monsters and vehicles. So in the shooting phase, enemy monsters and vehicle units that are engaged can be selected as a target of range attacks. Each time a model makes a ranged attack that targets such a unit, subtract 1 from the hit roll, excluding attacks made with the close quarters weapons to units that they're engaged with. So this is exactly the same as before. You can still shoot at monsters and vehicles, and you will be -1 to hit. And yes, this in theory clarifies what I was trying to work out earlier, that a vehicle in combat can still shoot out of combat, because it was very difficultly worded. But let's see what it says. So when it comes to Unit A, the vehicle is shooting of this infantry unit while using close quarter shooting. While resolving attacks at target, subtract 1 from the hit roll, excluding attacks made with close quarter weapons. The infantry unit can shoot at the vehicle using normal shooting. While resolving these attacks, subtract the hit roll, subtract 1 from the hit roll. As the vehicle is engaged, blast weapons cannot but can target other unengaged units. So that is the same as before. So weirdly, I feel like this you also needed up early on where it was talking about shooting. But this is basically big guns never tire is the current rule. But no longer has that. Also, we've got a thing all about transport capacity. So models have a transport capacity because some units are transports and can carry transport different models, and transport capacity is how much they can transport. Locking. So once the first battle round has started, a friendly unit can embark within a friendly transport model after making an advanced, normal, or fallback move if all the following apply. So each model in that unit is within 3 inches of the transport. That unit is not set up on the battlefield this turn. That unit is eligible to embark within that transport as described in transport's datasheet, and transport has sufficient remaining transport capacity for each model in that unit. And basically you remove it from the battlefield, put it to one side, it's now on the transport, and then disembarking. If the active player's movement phase, each friendly unit embarked within that transport model can disembark from it. If the transport model is destroyed before removing it from the battlefield, the player must make an emergency disembark move, see below, with each embarked unit within it. So again, this has a lot of stuff to do it. So the setup distance is a rapid or tactical disembark is 3 inches, and then a combat disembark is 6 inches. So eligible if all of the following rules apply to your unit. The embarked unit embarked within the transport model that is on the battlefield, did not embark within the transport this phase, and this transport has not made an advance or fallback move. So this is specifically about a disembark move, but there are 3 different types. So again, I feel like these should just be 3 separate boxes. So you got a rapid disembark, which is if you made a normal move or an ingress move this phase. So if you made a rapid disembark while moving, if that transport made an ingress move, each model must follow the same rules that transport had to follow while resolving that move. And then at the end, after that, until the end of that turn, your unit is not eligible to declare a charge. So basically, if you make a normal move with a transport, you can't charge. Then there's tactical disembark. So otherwise, if that transport remains stationary or has not yet been selected to move this phase, you can set up your unit as described below. Each model, and there is no while moving because you're doing it basically before. And then you can make a normal move or an advanced move still this phase. And obviously, I assume you can still charge as well. And then lastly, we got combat disembark, which is otherwise you must select this mode, make a hazard roll for each model in your unit. Each model can be set up in engagement range of one or more enemy units that the transport is engaged with. And specifically, the transport has to be in combat with it. You can't just kind of jump out the back into combat with another unit. So that's worth bearing in mind. Because this is a 6-inch move, not a 3-inch. Each model, your unit is battle shocked, and until the end of the turn is not eligible to declare a charge because you're kind of in combat already. So that's a big change. So you can disembark into combat is basically the main thing. But you've got to take a hazard roll, which again is on a 1 or a 2. And then also we've got an emergency disembark move, which I imagine is going to be similar. So your setup distance is 6 inches, embarked within the transport has been destroyed. You make a hazard roll for each model in your unit. Then while moving, set up each model in your unit wholly within the setup distance of a transport as close as possible to the transport. Each model that cannot be set up in this way is destroyed. And then after moving, although it's weird because you're not moving the transport, you're moving your models. Your unit is battle shocked, and until the end of the turn is not eligible to declare a charge. So this is quite tough. So you got to take a hazard roll. You've then got to sit, and you do that first, right? So normally, would you do? I think you would do it in that order normally. Then you've got to try and set up your models, in which case you might have some destroyed. And it says within the transport as close as possible. I assume also into combat. It says it doesn't say anything about not being in combat. That's specific to all the other ones. And then after moving, you are battle shocked and you're not eligible to declare a charge. So there is a small chance. Yeah, this could be really damaging to you. Especially with hazard rolls being on 1 or 2. Right. Then we're on to forming attached units. So some units have leaders or support units. These are basically splitting out what we currently have for characters. So multiple characters like captains and an ancient who's a banner bearer can now basically both join the same unit, and it's sort of more formalized and codified in terms of how that works. So you get leaders and support. For the battle, if you're in the muster army step, for each leader and support unit in your army, you can select one friendly bodyguard unit that unit can lead. The unit will then be led. The unit will then lead that bodyguard unit onto the battlefield and form an attached unit within it. Unless otherwise stated, each bodyguard unit can only have one leader and one support unit attached to it. I'm sure there will be some rules around, because things like commissars and command squads can join units, and some of those might have multiple things in it. So there might be ways to get extra sort of support units into a unit. Attacking attached units. Each time an attack targets the attached unit, if that unit contains one or more bodyguard models, use the highest toughness characteristic of the bodyguard models in that unit while resolving the attacks, even if the leader or support unit in the attached unit has a different toughness characteristic. If the unit only contains leader or support models, use the highest toughness characteristic of those models while resolving the attacks instead. That's kind of cool. And rules that trigger when a unit is destroyed are only triggered when the last model that started the battle in the attached unit is destroyed. So that's good that they clarified that, because sometimes, especially when it comes to like completing cards, you're like, well, I've killed the bodyguard unit, so do I now tick a point? Do I get a pain point for Drakari, for example? But now it's like, no, you've got to entirely wipe out the entire unit. There's talking about keywords in attached unit. So an attached unit has all the keywords of all of its component units. As such, an attached unit is affected by any rules that apply to units with any of those keywords. Note that models in the attached unit do not gain the keywords of other models in the unit. So basically, units gain all the keywords, but models on an individual level do not. And they point out the fact that you can have psychers. So a leader that has a psyker keyword basically gives that entire unit psyker. So then if the unit as a whole is being attacked, the first attacks will go into the bodyguard, and as such, an anti-psyker 4+ will affect that bodyguard unit. Then they talk about abilities in attached units. So this is where I've clarified some new things. So this is new abilities, rules that affect single specified models, e.g. from an enhancement or an item of war gear, only ever apply to that model, even while part of an attached unit. Otherwise, abilities and rules apply to every model in the attached unit until the source of that ability or rule is destroyed. So if the source of the rule is a leader or support unit, the last model in the leader support unit is destroyed. So currently you have things like, I think their example they gave is like a chaplain can give you like, say, +1 to your weapon skill. I don't know if that's the case, but let's assume that's the case. Currently, when the bodyguard unit is destroyed, the leader is no longer leading the unit, so loses that ability, but now it's basically saying it gets to keep it, which is fantastic, because why would a chaplain suddenly forget how to fight or be good at it just because the bodyguard unit's gone? However, if the bodyguard unit is the source of a rule, the last model and bodyguard unit is destroyed, that ability disappears, and then if it's a specific model, only when that specific model is destroyed does that go. And then they quantify it, but by not calling it a designer's note, but they do say this means leader and support units continue to benefit from their own rules while this model is leading a unit ability, even after the bodyguard unit has been destroyed. So that is a huge change, makes those characters much more beefier. And then it says, in all of the above cases, if the last model was destroyed as a result of an attack, the ability it was conferring upon the attached unit applies until the attack has been resolved. So that makes perfect sense. Then we've got strategic reserves. We've got placing units in strategic reserves. So before the battle, in the declared battle formation step, you can select one or more to put it in strategic reserve. That's the same as before. Repositioned units, though. So some rules allow units to be removed from the battlefield and placed into strategic reserves during the battle. So units that use such rules, which was often called uppy-downy, is now known as repositioned units. So often they would come off the table in your opponent's turn at the end for you to then redeploy back down in your turn. In addition to any other rules that apply to such units, such as where they can or cannot arrive, i.e. whether they can deep strike or just come on from a table edge, all of the following rules apply. So if used in the movement phase, such rules can be used on units that have already moved that phase. A repositioned unit that is set back up in the same turn in which it made an advance, fallback, or disembark move has still made an advance, fallback, and disembark move that turn. When they are removed from the battlefield, any rules that are affecting such units for a specified duration or under specified circumstances continue to affect them while that duration or circumstances apply. So that's good to know. Then we've got arriving from strategic reserve. So this is interestingly where the ingress move is being talked about. It hasn't been, talked about in the move section, and it's not a stratagem, so it wasn't there. So to arrive from the battlefield, each strategic reserve unit must make an ingress move. To arrive on the battlefield, each strategic reserve unit must make an ingress move. Unless otherwise stated, they can only do this from second battle round onwards. So your setup distance is 6 inches. Interesting that it's not 8, but it specifically says eligible if your unit is in strategic reserves, excluding units that are embarked within transports that are themselves in strategic reserve. Okay. While moving, set this up wholly within the setup distance of one or more battlefield edges, which I guess is the 6 inches, and more than 8 inches horizontally from all enemy units. And then it says, before the third battle round, while doing so, no models can be set up within your opponent's deployment zone. So this is similar to what it was before, although at one point, I feel like this was maybe 8th or probably like a 9th edition thing, like, turn 1, it could be your deployment zone. Turn 2, it was like outside your opponent's deployment zone, but anywhere else, so like the edges. And then lastly, from turn 3 onwards, it was your opponent's deployment zone. Unless otherwise stated, until the end of the next charge phase, your unit is not eligible to make any other type of move. So that's good that it's just clarified it there. And then it says at the end of the third battle round, unless otherwise stated, all strategic reserve units that have not made one or more ingress moves are destroyed, with the following exception: units embarked within transports that have made an ingress move during the battlefield and repositioned units. So it's basically saying if you start the battlefield, you are a unit that's arriving from strategic reserves, and you will die if you haven't made an ingress move by turn 3. However, if you're a unit that starts or ends up on the table and then you put them back into reserves, you are repositioned and therefore you don't die. So you could stay in reserves longer past turn 3, but you have to be specifically a repositioned unit. So that makes good sense, and good that they've clarified that up. Now we've got flying and surging. Now I feel like surge move could have been talked about earlier, but I guess they're calling it an advanced rule, so they don't want to put it in with all the other types of moves. So some rules allow units to make a surge move. These are rules that have been written on data sheets that are now being codified within the main core rules. My one thing that I will say, a thing about the sticky objectives and the surge moves, these are rules that were on data sheets that were custom made. So are we going to get some rules creep with those, where those are basically going to become keyword abilities? And then because every unit needs a custom rule on their data sheet, will they now get an extra ability? written in. Who knows? It will be interesting to see what happens with those, but I thought I would just point that out. So yeah, your maximum distance is as stated in the rules, allowing this move type. So I guess that's just your movement maybe. You're eligible if all of the following apply. So the rules allowing this move type have been triggered. Your unit is not battle shocked, your unit is unengaged, and your unit has not moved this phase. So the effect is your unit moves as described in moving, and before moving, you select the closest enemy unit to be the surge target. While moving, each model must end its move engaged with the surge target if possible. So you've got to end up engaged if possible. Each model that cannot end its move engaged with the surge target must end its move as close as possible to the surge target. This doesn't mean you can't basically move one model that specifically like blocks your others, but I sort of feel like the spirit is written in a way to try and minimize those kind of gamey tactics, because you don't want to, end up too close to them for some reason. Each model that cannot end its move engaged with the surge target must end its move as close as possible to the surge target, and then after moving, your unit cannot be engaged with one or more enemy units that were not surge targets. So you can't just, pile into, effectively surge into other units, and your unit cannot move again at this phase. So it's great that it's like a kind of one-off move, but most of the time a surge move happens in your opponent's turn. It doesn't really specify that here because it's not a stratagem, but that's often when it happens. But maybe there'd be times when it can trigger in your turn. Then we get flying models. So models with the fly keyword can also be flying. Each flying unit that is selected to make a normal, advanced, fallback, or charge move before moving can basically decide to go take to the skies. And when it does, it subtracts 2 from the maximum distance. You can ignore vertical distances for the purposes of how far it moves. You can move through all types of vehicles, including enemy monsters and vehicles, which you couldn't normally if you were a monster or vehicle. And it can move horizontally and vertically through terrain features. So this is fantastic. So this is a great change for flying, because the current version where you're moving diagonally up and over ruins, terrible. It only costs you 2 inches, which for a lot of things like jet bikes, for example, you were often doing anyway if you were pivoting, for example. So this feels like a great win for flyers in the game. So then we've got other advanced rules, so other rules and abilities. So we've got aura abilities, basically specifying you are within range of your own aura ability, and you've got to be within range. You have factional abilities, you've got psychic abilities, and then you've got war gear abilities. Then you've got plunging fire, which has been well talked about on the community. So basically, each time a model makes a ranged attack that targets a visible unit containing one or more models on ground levels, if one or more of the following conditions apply, improve the ballistic skill characteristic of that attack by 1. So the attacking model is on a section of terrain feature that is 3 inches or more in height, so above ground floor, and then the attacking model has the towering keyword, and the target unit is within 12 inches. So basically you've got to be a knight, for example. But what's interesting is you could be a knight, and in this example, target the unit that's on the ruins, that's 3 inches above, could be 6 inches above. Heck, this unit could be much higher up than even the knight, but the knight is still getting the +1 ballistic skill, which kind of feels nonsense. And I am aware that basically aircraft are exempt from plunging fire, so they don't get it, even though they are much, higher up than everyone else. So that feels a bit silly that they don't also get it. It feels a bit unthematic, but it is what it is. And then here we are onto aircraft. Speak of the devil. So this has some interesting stuff to do with it. So your deployment phase, in the declare battle formation step, all aircraft units must be placed in strategic reserve. So that means you start off the table. Aircraft units are only eligible to make an ingress move. They are not eligible to make any other type of move. So that means they're always only coming on 6 inches from the table edge, unless I guess they have deep strike. I assume that also stacks. So therefore they could come on somewhere else. At the end of your opponent's turn, all aircraft units in your army that are on the battlefield must be placed in strategic reserve. Each time a unit makes a type of move. Its models can be moved through aircraft models. Each time you make a pile-in, consolidation, or surge move, unless that unit can fly, it basically ignores the aircraft for the purposes of selecting enemy units and determining the closest one. And being engaged solely with one or more aircraft units does not prevent a unit from being eligible to make a normal or advanced move. Shooting, so specifically says a plunging fire rule has no effect on attacks made by or targeting aircraft. I totally think aircraft should get plunging fire, but should not benefit from being targeted by it. At least it can't be shot with them from like towering. That makes perfect sense. But I did note that obviously towering units can shoot units that are much higher up than them and still gain the benefit. Charging and fighting aircraft units are not eligible to declare a charge and can only make melee attacks that target flying units. So interestingly, they can't charge. Sort of makes sense. But they can still fight. But obviously, they're going to be charged by some other things. I sort of feel like maybe some flyers, like some of the Orc ones, should be a bit kamikaze and should be allowed to make charges. But it sort of makes sense that they wouldn't, I guess. Only flying units can select aircraft units as charge. Only flying units can select aircraft units as charge. Okay, so no one else can charge aircraft, basically. And only flying models can make melee attacks that target aircraft units. So that makes sense. Yeah, great photos of aircraft. And then lastly, we're down to references. So what do we have here? We've got abilities. Weapon abilities are things like blast, lethal hits, etc. Duplicated ability. So multiple instances of same core ability or weapon ability are not cumulative. Players must select which ability will apply at any one time. In the case of duplicate weapon abilities, this selection must be made each time each time a unit makes an attacks. Okay, interestingly. So it's sort of saying things like if you get Scout and you've got multiple versions, so Scout 6, Scout 8, you've got to pick which one. Similarly, Sustained Hits 1 and Sustained Hits 2 don't stack to be Sustained Hits 3. You've got to pick one of them. And likewise, multiple instances of things like anti-infantry and anti-vehicle, you've got to select which one, which is quite useful. So what do we have here? We've got anti, which is basically anti-X. So you've got to, against a certain thing, so such as vehicles, you can wound them automatically on a roll of whatever the thing is. So the example here is anti-vehicles 4+, attacking a vehicle, you get a critical wound, which is an auto wound basically on a 4+. Assault basically now just allows you to do an assault shooting attack, which is kind of clarified in the assault shooting rule, so you don't really need it here, but it just says that you can do that. So again, they've just taken one rule and they've shifted it elsewhere. Blast, same as before, but now I think you can have Blast X, which is new. So Blast is you get one additional attack dice for every 5 models that were in the target unit. If this ability has Blast X, each time you gather attack dice for the weapon, add X additional dice for every 5 models. So for example, it says blast 2 weapons with an attack characteristic of 3, target unit of 12. You would gather an additional 4 attack dice for that weapon for a total of 7. Cleave is basically the same, but for combat specifically. So Cleave X, each time you gather attack dice for the Cleave weapon, if you only selected one target for all of the weapons attacks, which is interesting, add X additional attack dice for every 5 attacks that were the target. That makes sense. So you can't like split them out basically. Then we've got close quarters, which is new, which is basically replacing the pistols. So units containing one or more models with close quarter weapons can shoot during close quarters shooting. When using another shooting type, for each model in that unit, excluding monster vehicles, you can only select one of the following to make attacks: one or more close combat quarter weapons, or one or more other ranged weapons. So this is where I was saying that infantry can now technically shoot all their weapons. Things like pistols you have to basically pick those over anything else. On a rare instance where you have multiple close quarter weapons, you can select all of those. Deep strike, so each time a unit makes an ingress move for every model in this unit that has this ability, you can set up anywhere on the battlefield more than 8 inches away from enemy models, even if that unit is within the opponent's deployment zone. Okay, cool. So Deep Strike still does the same thing and still works with ingress in the same way as before. Deadly Demise, I'm pretty sure is the same. So Deadly Demise X, each time the unit is destroyed, you roll a dice. If this model made an emergency disembark move, roll a d6. On a 6+, that model suffers a Deadly Demise. Each unit within 6 inches of that model suffers the number of mortal wounds denoted by X. If this is a random number. So that's interesting. So each time a model in this unit is destroyed, after the unit embarked within it, if any, have made their emergency disembark moves. So actually, when you're making your emergency disembark, you roll for your sort of hazardous test to see if any models die from the explosion. Then you place them on the table to make sure you can fit, and some might die because they don't fit. Then, if any have made and then you basically roll your Deadly Demise, and then they might die then. So actually, for units coming out of a transport via Deadly Demise, you might suffer twice, because basically you suffer your emergency disembark hazardous roll, and then you might get blown up, I believe, from the Deadly Demise rule, which is horrible. It's weird that it happens twice in a way. After units embarked within it, if any have made their emergency, so that is a strange one. Then we got Devastating Wounds, which is the same as before. So on a critical wound, the attack sequence ends and you just suffer that many mortal wounds. Mortal wounds inflicted by devastating wound weapons can damage a maximum of 1 model for each critical wound. Any remaining mortal wounds inflicted by that attack are lost. So that is just clarifying the stipulation, what they had to FAQ in the last edition, because that was important. So they don't spill over. Extra attacks allow you to just do extra attacks with one of those weapons, because normally you can only select one weapon profile, but extra attacks just allow you to do them. Firing Deck X allows you to shoot outside of transports. For each selected model, select one of its ranged weapons, excluding one-shot weapons. So you can't do that. Units in this transport are resolving. Until this transport has resolved all of its attacks, it has all of the selected weapons in addition to the other weapons. To the end of the turn, units embarked within the transport are not eligible to shoot. So basically, I believe the transport fires the selected weapons. So it would be done at the transport's ballistic skill, for example. So until this transport has resolved all of its attacks, it has all of those selected weapons. You select X models embarked within the transport, and then for each selected model, you select one of its ranged weapons. So interesting, it's only one, but that does make sense. So Feel No Pain, same as always. Each time you take damage, you get to do a Feel No Pain save, and that wound is not lost. Fights First just gives you Fights First, which we talked about. And then Hazardous, each time a selected unit shoots or is selected to fight, you have to make a hazardous check. So you make the hazard roll, which again is 1 to 2, as we've mentioned. And there's still more. So then there's heavy. So in your shooting phase, each time attack is made with a heavy weapon, add 1 to the hit roll if the following is true: the unit is unengaged, the unit is not set up, and no model in the unit has moved more than 3 inches this turn. So you can make, interestingly, a small shuffle forwards, but it's not the heavy model specifically, it's no model in the unit has moved more than 3 inches. So that's kind of cool. Hover. Is this new? Hover? Feels like it's new. Each time this unit takes to the skies, do not subtract 2 inches from the maximum distance. Ooh, okay, interesting. It specifically says some airborne vehicles can use vectored thrusters or anti-gravity technology to hover and skim over the battlefield to better hunt their prey and deploy their embarked troops. So maybe things like jet bikes don't need to take to the sky, but things like maybe jump packs and things like that, or winged monstrous creatures will still need to use those 2 inches. So the fact that jet bikes don't even potentially get that 2 inches, that's very cool. Now we're seeing the days of like repulsors having that hover keyword. So we've got infiltrators. So during deployment, if every model in this unit has this ability, it can be set up anywhere on the battlefield that is more than 8 inches horizontally from your opponent's deployment zone and all enemy units. Interestingly, it ignores vertical distances. It says 8 inches horizontally from your opponent's deployment zone and all enemy units. Stance is if you made a charge move, you get +1 to wound. Leader is just an ability where you can be attached to units. Ignores cover now. Each time an attack is made with the ignores cover weapon, the target cannot have the benefit of cover, which, as we know, is -1 to be hit, including rules that give a model or unit benefit of cover, like stealth. Indirect fire allows you to do the indirect shooting. So again, it's just referring to a different rule. Lethal hits basically give you critical hits on that dice roll. Interesting, it says, designers note, choosing to automatically wound the target means that no wound roll is made for the attack. You may decide against this, as it means that attacks cannot result in a critical wound and so cannot trigger other abilities such as devastating wounds. Interesting. So you can choose for the attacks to automatically wound targets. So you actually, if you have lethal hits and devastating wounds, you might decide to ignore lethal hits, which I've never really thought about, whether that was something you can do. I always assumed it just automatically applied. So it's great if that's how that's now done. Lone operative, unless the part is an attached unit. Unless part of an attached unit, right, so basically you've got to be on your own. Again, negatives. This unit is not visible to enemy models unless they are within 12 inches of this unit. And it cannot be targeted by indirect fire weapons unless the attacking model is within 12 inches of this unit. Okay. I hate how that's worded, because it says unless it's part of an attached unit. It just says while this unit is not attached to a unit would make way more sense. If this ability takes the form lone operative X inches, part of an attached unit, this unit is not visible to enemy units unless they are within X inches, basically, and same with indirect fire. I think that's terribly worded, and I assume it's, again, that kind of legalese speak, but I think that could have been tidied up much easier and be much more streamlined. One shot basically gives you a weapon that can only be fired once, but it says if a destroyed model is returned to a unit, all of its one-shot weapons that have been selected to make attacks with during the battle cannot be selected to make attacks with again, so you can't recycle your one-shot weapons, which is good. But if a new unit is added to your army, all one-shot weapons basically can be used again. Melter is basically same as always. If you're making attacks with a melter weapon, if the target is within half range, you get some extra damage. Pistol, interestingly, and close quarter weapons are identical for all rules purposes, as I sort of speculated earlier. Basically, pistol and close combat, sorry, I keep getting those mixed up. Pistol and close quarters is exactly the same, and they've got to include pistol because that's on, it's basically on data sheets. Then we've got some core abilities, some more. We've got precision, which basically allows you to target a visible character. If a target unit contains one or more visible characters to one or more of the attacking models, the active player can select one allocation group that contains one or more visible character models. If they do, until those attacks are resolved or until the character group is destroyed, whichever happens first, that character group is the current character group. I guess they don't really say what happens afterwards, and you've still got extra attacks, but I assume all of those attacks go into that character group and then the attacks end. That could be sort of specified. Psychic, this has changed slightly. So each time an attack is made with a psychic weapon, you can ignore any and all modifiers to the attack's ballistic skill and weapon skill characteristic, which includes benefits of cover, which is a big one, and any or all modifiers to the hit roll. Attacks made with the psychic weapons are known as psychic attacks, which is just triggering for important rules. But then we've got Scout. So this ability allows you to take the form of Scout X and resolve pre-battle abilities. If every model in the unit has this ability, do one of the following. So if the unit is in strategic reserves, you can set up that unit anywhere that is wholly within your deployment zone. So this is new, all right? So you can place a unit in strategic reserves, and then basically during your pre-battle abilities, you can put that unit back on the table, but it's got to be within your deployment zone, which is kind of cool, right? Because normally I assume pre-battle abilities, at that point, do you know whose turn is going first? That's the key thing, the order. If not, then it doesn't make much difference. but you could have some interesting shenanigans, like you can keep it off the table so your opponent that might be trying to target it by counter deploying with a specific unit doesn't know where it's going to go. If that unit is wholly within your deployment zone, it can make a scout move. If that unit is embarked within a dedicated transport that is wholly within your deployment zone, and every model embarked within it has scouts, it can make a scout move. And that's basically Scout X. You can move that many inches, and you've got to move outside of 8 inches, basically, of your opponent. And then Rapid Fire gives you additional attack dice when you're within half range of that weapon. So that's same as before. And we've still got more. So Stealth gives you the benefit of cover, which is -1 to be hit, but it doesn't now stack by being in cover. So it just means it's great for you to run around while outside of cover. Support is another way of attaching units. Super Heavy Walker is its own thing. So each time a unit with this ability makes a normal move, advance, or fallback move, bet it's going to be able to move over other things. So models in this unit can now move through models, including monsters, vehicles, models, but excluding other Titanic models. That makes sense. And can move horizontally through sections of terrain features that are 4 inches or less in height, which is normally like a whole ground floor. So that's pretty cool. Before moving that unit, you can select for all models in that unit to have the mobile keyword until the move ends. If you do, when that move ends, roll a d6 and roll a 1. That unit is battle shocked. Why would you do that? Any of a mobile keyword for the duration of move will enable models in that unit to move horizontally through dense terrain. Where's the mobile keyword then? Did I miss that? Scout? No, it should be here. Why is it not there? And then was that? Okay. The dense terrain. Okay, so it must have been up in the dense terrain, but right, I'm going to quickly find that to double check. The one time that they don't actually give you, I think it was 13 point something or other. Terrain objectives, terrain. Okay, hidden, obscuring, solid. It was dense. No, it's got to be next one up. Okay. Moving, ending move. One model can move, was it? Why don't I see the mobile keyword anywhere? So dense, nothing there about mobile. Terrain and moving. Other models can move horizontally through dense terrain feature, providing that section. Here it is. Dense infantry model swarm and mobile. Okay, so it is there. I think I remember calling that out when we got to it. So that's interesting. They kind of clarify it there. Okay, let's go back to the section that I had. It's kind of mad that you gain mobile, which is a keyword, but like maybe not an ability, and that it would sort of make sense. It's an ability that they talk about here, as well as calling it out in the terrain rules. But I guess here in the designer's note, it talks about it. Otherwise, you'd be like, well, what does this even mean? It could have just said, you get to do it. Okay. But specifically, only super heavy walkers can do that. So other vehicles like tanks don't get that ability, even though some stratagems give it to you. And that would be kind of helpful. But never mind. Sustained hits. I don't remember if I talked about that, but basically each time you get a critical hit, you get that many extra attacks. Torrent, each time an attack is made with a torrent weapon, it automatically hits. Often Torrent also gave you the benefits of cover, which now wouldn't do anything anyway, so they will be phased out as the data sheets get rolled out in new codexes. And then we've got Twin Link. So Twin Link gives you a reroll to the wound roll, which is the same as before. So then let's see what else they've got. Obviously talks about how you've got the rules appendix continued in the app. So digital support. The Warhammer 40k app contains the expanded range of definitions, rare rules, interactions, and frequently asked questions as in FAQs. These digital resources are designed to clarify any uncertainty and keep your battles as streamlined as possible. As such, they're reviewed and updated regularly in response to player feedback. The following pages present a selection of the supporting material. So just giving you the key ones to get going, which sort of makes sense. But, you know, if you how can you play this game if you don't have the app? If the app disappears because it gets updated to 12th edition, in the future. You can only use so much of this core rulebook to play the game. Starting strength and half strength clarifies that. What happens when you add a new unit to your army? What happens when a unit is destroyed? Different movement characteristics, eligible to fight but unable to fight. Interesting. Let's see what that one says. During the fight sequence, when the sequence returns to the player to select a unit to fight, if all of the player's units that are eligible to fight are more than 5 inches from all enemy units, that player can instead choose to pass and return to the sequence of their opponents to select a unit. If both players pass in succession, or if one player passes when the opponent has no remaining units that is eligible to fight, the fight step ends. Designers note occasionally all of the unit's targets will be destroyed before they have a chance to fight, with no other targets close enough to engage or pile in moves. As such, in such cases, a player can choose to pass and wait to see if another enemy unit ends a pile-in move close enough to be attacked later in the phase. That makes sense. Annoyingly, under C also has got regaining lost wounds and being revived. I feel like those are really cool abilities with like heal mechanics that would be useful to have in the book here that we don't get. Interestingly, it has a section called Objectives Not Within Terrain Area. So if the location point of an objective does not coincide with the terrain area, you must denote it. You must denote the location of that objective with a flat circular marker 40 millimeters in diameter centered on that point. This is called an objective marker. Models can move through objective markers as they can end a move on top of an objective marker. A model is within range of an objective marker while it is within 3 inches horizontally and 5 inches vertically of that objective marker by measuring distances to and from the objective marker, measuring to and from the closest part of it. So interestingly, even though they've made a big song and dance about the objective markers are gone, area objectives are thematically within the game, basically having their cake and eating it, and objective markers can maybe still be in the game. It might be useful for certain missions or different themes. Maybe some sort of more narrative games might have them or something. So that is interesting. They do talk about being revived here. Hold on. Revived, specifically, see also half strength, revived shouldn't be here. But for some reason, revived is here. I guess maybe these are things that are in the app, but they're just giving me a few. So let's see what revived says. So when a rule revives, resurrects, or returns models to a unit, the specified number of destroyed models are added to the unit. Cannot expand a unit beyond its starting strength. Such models are added with all the wargear enhancements that they started the battle with, and unless otherwise stated, they are returned with the full wounds remaining. Models returned to a unit on the battlefield must be set up in the following way. So incoherency, only engage with one or more enemy models, but only if the enemy unit is already engaged with the unit. And if a leader or support model in the attached unit is destroyed and subsequently revived, it is still part of the attached unit and must be returned. So I guess there's a very small chance if you had a character that was killed by precision and you had a way of reviving it, you could do. So let's see what some of these FAQs are. So is the unit with no ranged weapons eligible to shoot in the controlling player's shooting phase? So it says yes, even though a unit cannot make ranged attacks, it's still eligible to shoot, which is a specific phrase, which can affect its eligibility for other rules such as actions. And it says, when my unit shoots using close quarter shooting, can monsters or vehicle models in my unit target an engaged unit with blast weapons? It says no. When a unit shoots an engaged monster or vehicle unit, can models in my unit target that unit with blast weapons? It says no. So when my unit shoots at an engaged monster or vehicle unit, can models in my unit target blast weapons? So assuming you're shooting out of, so you're out of combat, shooting into a combat at a monster or vehicle, you can't use blast weapons? I didn't think that was a thing, but it's very vaguely worded. When my unit shoots at an engaged monster or vehicle unit, can models in my unit target that unit? Okay, Cool. You can't use blast while shooting at a monster or vehicle in combat. Can a unit that is eligible to make an overrun fight be selected to do so if it is not eligible to fight? So it says no. Sometimes a unit can become engaged after the start of the fight step, but then become unengaged later in the step. If this happens and is no longer eligible to fight, it cannot make an overrun fight. And lastly, can a unit embark within a transport after making a scout move? So it says no, scout moves happen in the resolve pre-battle abilities step of the battle, which comes after the declare battle formation step and before the battle step. Okay, and that's it. So we're still missing all of those sort of pre-battle sequences. We're missing how to, form, muster your army. All of that, I guess, is coming in the sort of chapter approved thing. I mean, it sort of would be nice to have those things. Because at the moment you're like, okay, cool. When does that scout move actually happen? Don't know. Because, I can assume based on the current edition, but they might have changed it. Okay, so let's do a brief summary. That is hours long of me reading the core rules. I feel like it was quite useful. I'm sure maybe you've just read, somebody's half-hour snippets of the core rules, and maybe that would give you everything. But there are some really niche changes here that I think might catch a few people out. There's obviously some really big changes, like things like cover being hidden, overrun as a mechanic. I think will take a long time for people to get used to. Some of how the stratagems work, I think, is really interesting. I don't think there's anything really negative to say about these rules. Obviously, because it's an edition change where they're not indexing the codexes, all the codexes are valid. There's only so much they can do. Personally, I would still love it if the psychic keyword kind of had a test involved to actually pull it off, but in terms of streamlining the game, it makes perfect sense. I do miss the days of having, a psychic phase and a dedicated spells that you are effectively casting. Those days have been and gone, and I don't think we'll see that again anytime soon. I think it's impressive. I think the layout overall is pretty good. Obviously, getting this in a small form like A6 book that it's going to come within the box is going to be really useful when it comes to playing the game. The slightly legally style rules numbering actually is a bit useful, but mostly when it's referencing other things, so that's not too bad. Overall, the wording isn't as legalese as I think it would be. Getting rid of the bullet points, I think, is a double-edged sword. One, it was really handy, but also two, it was actually, people would just read that and sort of ignore the rest. So I think actually reducing that, also it just doubled up on space, right? It took up a lot more space. I feel like overall the way it's worded isn't as bad as it had been in previous years, but there are still elements where they almost do a double negative, and they would, if you are not doing this, then you can do this, but just say if you're doing this thing instead. I think it's sometimes a better way of going about it. There are some really core foundational terms which aren't inherent in the app instead. So it's, this isn't necessarily a pick up and play book to a complete newbie. It's interesting that they are relying a lot more on the app going forwards. It'll be interesting to see what they do with that. It'll be interesting to see if the current app gets updated to a 11th edition, and 10th edition effectively disappears from the face of the planet other than via the PDFs. Previous times they would release a separate app that you would download. So in theory, if it's still on your phone, your old app would still be playable if you wanted to play an old edition. If I want to go back and play 9th edition, I should still in theory have it on my phone, and I could play it if I wanted to. But if they just update the app, I can only play 11th edition, I'm assuming. I'd love it if they had a little mode where I could switch between them. I just doubt they would do that. Why do that benefit? On the plus side, they have announced that Legends units are going to be supported in the app, which is a massive win. I think it will make that much more playable. Obviously, there's some sort of they've conceded to the tournament players in terms of, line of sight blocking, lower buildings in terms of like the gaps and stuff like that. I'm not necessarily a huge fan of. I can see why they've done it from tournament play, because some terrain might not be suitable and things like that. But then I think you'll get to like these really weird immersion breaking moments where there's this massive gap in your terrain that you still can't be shot at. And that just feels really counterintuitive. And that's just because they need to appeal to tournament players and to balance. And don't even get me started on the mission decks that we're going to have with these prescribed terrain layouts. I think even though they're saying area terrain for objectives is more narrative, I just don't think the terrain layouts are going to be that narrative. But unfortunately, I feel like you'll need them to have a balanced gaming experience and not being shot off the table. But as I've already mentioned earlier, like there are ways of getting around mitigating the lethality of things like shooting. Combat's got some really nice, interesting changes. Battle Shock's got some really great changes in terms of it rolling on to other turns. So yeah, I'm pretty excited about the new edition. I'm excited about some other things that are going on as well. AOS has got a General's Handbook coming out. I'm working on some other bits. So yeah, I think this will be a fun game to see. I think everyone that's a bit intrepid with 40k at the moment is kind of keen to give it a fair shake and a play and see if it's any good. And if it's terrible, they'll just go back to playing AOS, I guess. But I hope it's good. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if they do any like major overhauls of the data sheets that currently exist in terms of like the armies and things like that. And these are all lots and lots of little tweaks, and ultimately it's because there's like an index. It's not an index edition, so they can't do too much. But I think these are all good quality of life improvements that they've made. But yeah, I think ultimately things like the data sheets might make changes as codexes come out, but I think ultimately it's the detachments and the new detachment styles and the new army building with this sort of free lots of detachments. That's all the really interesting stuff. I think that's the thing that people are going to get most excitement for, because that's the thing that's foundationally going to be changing their armies at launch. And that's not even here. That's not even in the core rules. That's, I guess, within chapter approved and with some free downloads. And to me, that is ultimately a lot of rules bloat as well. It's like going to be maybe 2 or 3 detachments extra on top of all the existing ones for people to go through. So yeah, it's a lot to read basically, but and it's just, yeah, if you're trying to comb through it and learn every army and every possible rule and detachment, and even trying to balance all of that, it's going to be impossible as well, right? So I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword. I think it's a great way of getting rules excitement to the players, but it definitely ends up being a lot more rules bloat. I wonder how much of these detachments or some of the older ones will be phased out as the chapter approves come along. Maybe next year a new chapter approve comes out and some of those older detachments like Grotmus phase out, but then maybe they'll be popular and people will still want them. So that'll be interesting to see what they do with that. So when this comes out, there's it will be, I think, pre-order day. I think I'm going to be getting the box. It'd be interesting to see what the actual price is. Yeah, I think I've covered everything now, and it's been a very long episode, so I don't think I'm going to do an outro, unfortunately, guys. So yeah, I don't think I'm going to do an outro. Hopefully next week we'll still be doing some 40k buzz chats. Sad news today as well that John Blanche died, or he died a few days ago, so that is really sad to hear. He was like a real influence in my gaming career and life in general, so maybe we'll talk about that in a future episode in a bit more detail dedicated to that, and that would be good to do. I mean, there's still there's too much to talk about, basically, and not enough time when it comes to podcasting. But I felt like the core rules was a great one to go through this episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. There's obviously no 5-star review because I'm not doing an outro this time. But yeah, that's it for now. Thank you very much. Take care. Goodbye, everyone. Goodbye.